with liberty and justice for all.
Susan, please call the roll.
Jim Holton.
Present.
Melanie Griffin.
Here.
Cliff Manuel.
Present.
Michael Millett.
Present.
Commissioner Wayne Dukes. Commissioner Dukes sends his regrets. He is unable to join us today. Commissioner Pat Kemp. Commissioner Betsy Benak.
Here.
Commissioner Catherine Starkey. Commissioner Starkey sends her regrets. She is unable to join us today. Commissioner Karen Seal.
Present.
Mayor Rick Kreisman. Mayor Kreisman sends his regrets. He is unable to join us today. Mayor Bob Buckhorn. Mayor Buckhorn sends his regrets. He is unable to join us today. Kathleen Shanahan.
Here.
Commissioner Janet Long.
Here.
Secretary David Glenn.
Here.
Secretary L.P. Nandam. You have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Susan. Would you also give the public service announcement regarding citizens' participation?
Persons wishing to address the board are requested to complete a comment card and give it to staff. Public comments will be limited to 3 minutes. The public comment period can be extended up to 30 minutes. And just for the record, there are 2 separate public comment cards, one specifically for public hearing items and one for regular board items.
Thank you, Susan. And I'm going to add to that that I am going to allow public comment today under various action items since we have a variety of different things coming up. And I think in the spirit of openness, government, and participation of the audience, it's appropriate to allow additional comment during that time. First of all, I would like to thank PSTA, their staff, especially their chair, our own Commissioner Long, for her gracious invitation for us to have our meeting here. It's a beautiful facility. Maybe we'll come here more often, hopefully so. And thanks again for having it live streamed today. We appreciate that. Commissioner Long, would you like to say a few comments about the facility here before we get started?
Well, I'll be very brief, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
I think you have to hit your...
Oh, yeah, how could I forget? I have to get in
practice. Thank you, everyone, for being here this morning and for taking time out of your day for this very important discussion. I am not going to repeat everything that Commissioner Holton said, but we are at PSTA very proud of this room and the technology that it offers, and I have extended on behalf of PSTA an opportunity for us to have more of these meetings here because it's so much more centrally located and easier for our citizens to get to as well. So thank you again for
And again, thanks you for your hospitality and the staff as well. This is the public hearing. First order of business, I'll recognize Ray Chiramonte to give us a report on the CCC. We do that.
The first item is the item of the TBARTA Metropolitan Planning Organization Chair's Coordinating Committee recommendation on future regional priority projects and future regional priority projects and future regional priority projects. To give you a little background, we opened this public hearing. All these projects are part of the approved MPO plans of the region. And this is the 8-county region we're really discussing here, and that because that's what the CCC represents. So we'll be going through these items very quickly, and this is the last part of action on this, which now that this MPO CCC is part of the TBARTA organization, these would come to this board, the final adopter of these priorities. So with that, we'll go through each one. We'll go through these priorities very quickly. Again, Howard Franklin Bridge rebuild. These are all things that you've heard about before. Suncoast Parkway 2. Only minor difference is they're going 3 miles farther north to County Road 486. Gateway Expressway, which is about to start construction in Pinellas County. The State Road 54, 56 corridor improvements that Pasco County MPO is working with their citizens on deciding on moving forward with. The DeSoto Bridge replacement in Manatee County. The River Road Regional Interstate Connector down in Lower Sarasota County. The Regional Transit Catalyst Project, we've kind of lumped all these together rather than having them so separate. They're all related to each other. We have Central Avenue BRT, the Multimodal Center West Shore, Regional Express Bus Possible Demonstration Projects, the Premium Transit Feasibility Implementation. You'll be hearing about that study later. And the CSX rail corridors about protecting right-of-way in those areas, and then waterborne transportation such as the ferry, and elevated transit on the State Road 60 corridor. These were all vetted by the NPOs. We've lumped the interstate projects into a general interstate modernization projects. This is also related to our transit project later. I-75 in Hillsborough, I-75 in Pasco, Big Bend Road interchange in South Hillsborough, Overpass Road interchange in Pasco, I-275 corridor, again, the big interchange by the airport at Memorial, the I-275 I-4 interchange, and I-275 continuity. That's the lanes when you go toward Bradenton after downtown St. Pete, making them blend together. Right now, you can never stay in one lane when you go through that area. You have to switch back and forth. Unfunded regional priorities, coast-to-coast trails. Again, this is a part of the Gulf Coast Trail. You remember we received some funding for that last year, and the different pieces of that, again, proceeding on to try to continue to get funding from the state. Idea of building a trail from Pinellas County all the way down to Naples. One project in Pasco County, the Northern Connection Phase 2 in Bartow area. And then funding the Regional Transit Development Plan for TBARTA again. You understand about our appropriation to be able to continue with that plan that will ultimately be the implementation of our transit. These are future regional priority transportation projects. They tend to be smaller. Again, not much changes here. We have 15th Street, Manatee, and Sarasota, State Road 50 improvements in Hernando to connect, have a northern connector for our region to Orlando from Hernando County. US 41 multimodal improvements down in Manatee, Sarasota, Campus Streetcar extension, I-75 at Solomon Expressway limited access highway connections in Pinellas. And with that, that is our new list. It isn't that different than the list we had before. Just a couple things have been reorganized. Again, it's gone through all the MPOs, it's gone through the CCC, and you're the last part of the action items.
Thank you, Ray. Any questions for Ray? Okay, none being heard, the chair recognizes Michael Case.
Morning, Michael Case, TBARTA staff. Like the regional priorities, this is an item that was approved by the CCC board on December 1st to be carried forward to the TBARTA board for your approval this morning. The project is called the 2015 Measures of Effectiveness Report. This project was managed and conducted by TBARTA. It was sponsored by the Hillsborough County MPO at a total cost of $70,000. There were three main tasks to this project. The first was to review regional public involvement activities over the past 2 years, starting with 2014 and ending with the end of 2015, and comparing that data with benchmarks set in 2012. The second part was to research best practices on regional public engagement across the country. The third was to create one joint regional public participation program for TBARTA and the TBARTA MPO-CCC. So the reason there are three parts to this project is because the MOE, the Measures of Effectiveness Report, which I'm going to cover in this presentation, gathered the data and informs a lot of the strategies that we're going to be covering in the next presentation, which is the Regional Public Participation Program. To help guide the effort, we put together a consortium of public engagement professionals across MPOs in our region, We called that group the Regional Public Participation Program Working Group, for short, RP3 Working Group. So you'll hear reference to that throughout this and the next presentation. Before I go through this table, let me just say there is a report in front of you today that has the methodology, the data, and the analysis in it. I'm not going to get into that information this morning. I'm only going to cover how we stacked against those 2012 benchmarks and what we plan to do in the next 2-year reporting period. Starting with 2012 goals under communication technology, leverage existing and emerging technologies to make our outreach more effective. We regularly use social media, including Twitter, Facebook, and several other platforms as well to make efforts more cost effective. Citizens Advisory Committee, the previous period there was an issue with maintaining quorums. We have that issue still at present. So where you see green marks, I should have said, is where we met the mark. X is where we didn't. So out of a total of 7 goals, we met 6 of them. So continuing on, possibilities for members attending from their homes by telecommute. We regularly offer that option to CAC members. Instructing presenters to give sort of an overview of their presentation and the implications for local and regional decision making. We do that as well. Under reductions in available funding, seeking partnerships with other agencies to promote projects and programs, which we have a wide array of partnerships that we use. Selecting accessible locations for meetings. We move around here and there, but we always make sure that whatever venue we select is always accessible, meets all the requirements for ADA. Under partnerships, seeking partnerships with economic growth and other entities to expand public participation opportunities. We also have a wide array of partnerships that we try to piggyback on to expand our message and make sure that we're getting out all the right information to the right audiences. So taking this data, looking at best practices, as well as getting feedback from our RP3 working group, we came up with 7 new goals for the next 2 years. The first is to expand on partnerships and start inviting them to MPO-CCC board meetings to provide their perspective on projects that we're working on. The second is for the TBARTA and CCC to work together on developing a social media strategy. This is a very rapidly moving field, so staying on top of it and knowing what everyone else is doing is a very important part of staying ahead of the curve. Goal 3, increasing user-friendliness of the TBARTA site and CCC webpage. If you've ever tried to visit the TBARTA site from a mobile phone, it's not the easiest to find information. So there is a cost attached with this. So while it's a goal, making sure that funding is available for it will be necessary to make sure that these improvements are taken care of. Goal 4, improving voting member attendance from 33%, only 1/3 of the time the CAC had quorum between 2014 and 2015. So there's things that we plan to do to try to help engage members and get them to come to wherever we're having the meeting and get that quorum. Goal 5, consistently distribute CAC agenda packets. There was a survey conducted with the CAC. A lot of them reported that they felt that they didn't get the packet in enough time to be able to absorb the materials, so that's something we plan to rectify as well. Goal 6, this also related to the survey that we conducted that's in the report. Increased percentage of members that feel the committee conducted decision-making from a regional perspective. We were already pretty high, but we'd like to see improvement in this area as well, from 70 to 75% at minimum. Some members also felt that they hadn't received proper training or information to be able to properly live up to the responsibilities being part of a regional entity. So we plan to examine the materials that we give them and information that we provide before meetings as well. Last goal, encourage CAC members to actively participate, especially when they're participating over teleconference. Also in the survey, a lot of members felt like they were a bit disengaged from presentations and the meeting when they were on teleconference. So very simple strategy we plan to do is regularly engage them during meetings and after presentations, especially those on the phone, and ask them if they have any comments. Some other recommendations, back to that RP3 working group, we plan to continue on with this group as an advisory group to help continue guiding our regional public engagement efforts and making sure that we're staying on top of everything, that we're coordinated with the MPOs, with FDOT, and other efforts that are going on around the region. We'd also like to, with this group, continue to identify and implement ways to clarify our regional roles and responsibilities for public participation efforts. When you're talking about public participation over a wide region, sometimes roles and responsibilities get a little bit muddy. So we plan to do that over the next period as well. So that concludes my presentation. If you have any questions or comments, I'd be happy to take them.
Thank you, Michael. Any questions for Michael? Betsy?
In looking all this over and reading about it, it occurs to me that MPOs are mandated to have a lot of things that TBARTA is not mandated to have.
That's correct.
So I wonder, are we doing this because of the CCC and not so much TBARTA? We're mandated to have to meet all of these regulations that require this level
Yep.
of study because of the CCC, but not because of TBARTA. Is there any? It just seems like we don't have much participation. I'm just wondering if it's worth it sometimes.
Well, I would say that it is worth it, particularly when you look at some of the data. A lot of people, well, first and foremost, are not aware of what an MPO is or who MPOs are. But particularly for TBARTA and the TBARTA MPO CCC, in elevating our standing and making sure that we're a recognizable brand is a part of this strategy. But you're absolutely right. In the past, our efforts have been much more project-related, and a lot of times we've actually piggybacked on some of the public participation strategies and events that MPOs do. So we plan to continue with that, but there is a distinct separation between what's required for MPOs and what's required for TBARTA within this plan that you're about to hear about.
Thank you. Other questions? Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
The chair next recognizes you, Pasco.
Good morning, members of the TBARTA board. Hugh Pasco, Pasco Planning. Thank you, Michael. Michael did a very good job of leading into what we're talking about now. Actually, we're going for more of the detailed assessment of how we determine success, failure in doing public involvement. But I think, the commissioner brought up a very good point, too. MPOs different, function at a different level. You're looking very much, again, at that fine level for your own MPO. When you get into regional public involvement, though, again, what is it? You've got a very wide market. You've got a very diverse market. And actually reaching out and getting the attention, engaging that market is a difficult thing to do. You can do it really at the local level, that's fine, and home in on your own issues. But we really have the responsibility, and you're going to hear a lot about that at the meeting today, of how you can take all of the things that are going on in the region and actually develop into some kind of a reasonable, cogent manner where you can bring all these things together and help you in making the decision-making process. The important thing is going out and actually engaging with the community, not setting up a hearing here or there or whatever, but a very active, dynamic program where we're taking what the individual MPOs do and bringing it together into a cohesive, consolidated project where, number one, you don't have too many different entities that are out there trying to sell the same product. We really want to be sure that that product is very clearly identified. It gets down to all levels, within our very broad region. Again, I say it all the time. The CCC is a very important entity. You cover about 100 to 200 mile area. When you're trying to reach out into that and trying to get the local issues that you have to deal with all the time, that again is something that we really have to have a lot of thought in how we really put it together. So the way we did it, we actually went out and we took a look at what we currently are doing. We really wanted to support a true regional decision-making process. Not just putting the information out there, but doing it in a way where you're really making a decision, helping you make a decision on how to move forward with the project or how to modify that project. So really a truly regional public involvement program considers concerns of local communities and an extremely diverse population. Consolidating programs is really what we're looking to do. You don't want to have, again, multiple entities out there trying to sell kind of the same product when we can all get together and learn from each other and really learn better how to effectively take this into the community. Not take it in there with meetings held at different areas, but really being very dynamic about taking a message out all the time. This is a continual process. Not just you have one little key, it's important to have milestones, but not only to have one milestone, but actually say, this is what really is assisting us in public involvement. And this decision-making process that we have built up over a long period of time, starting really with what Michael talked about, the RP3 advisory group, working up to the CCC, the staff directors, your MPO directors, going up to the CCC board. They just had their meeting back on December 1, and the TBARTA governing board. So you're moving up to this process really that reaches into the local area, but it's got to come to somebody. It has to come to somebody that says, we've got all this information in, you give it to us clearly, and we can use that again to make a decision that is going to work for the entire area. It's got to be a shared vision. You know, if you don't have a shared vision, it doesn't mean you're going to reach consensus all the time, but again, a shared vision is an important starting point to go out there and really say, this is really what we want to use as the overarching, again, vision about where we want to be. And again, we feel really strong solutions are done through collaboration, not little bits and pieces going out at different times, but true collaboration. And again, we have a formal, ongoing working group, and again, we really felt the most effective way to effectively coordinate activities. We did go back and look, Michael referenced this, we did look at state and national best practices. The one we really honed on, really, and kind of for our area too and the demographic, it was really the Atlanta area. They do an extremely active community engagement, coordination, and networking program. And the important point that we had here is community engagement. Not sitting there waiting for the comments to come to you, not setting up a very nice public hearing somewhere at a library, community center, or whatever, but again, actively engaging the people in the community. Who's going to know who the people are? They're going to be your own people. They're really not going to be something sitting up at a higher level. You've got to engage, and you've got to really reach out to the community to engage. It's got to be internal, you know, and external. A lot of times we tend to do things a little bit externally within our own process. Kind of happy at that point. But you've really got to be able to say, we're going to have to reach out of that area. We're going to have to go out there and look at the community. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes a lot of coordination. You've got to be creative about doing it. Atlanta told us all the time, they have a whole toolbox of things that they do, from what they call dinner parties, getting people together, impromptu, pop-up events. You've heard more and more about that. But things, again, that are very creative that go out there and really all of a sudden make the people realize there are things going on, and this is different. They have millennial groups. They have groups, you know, that are lower income. But they, again, look at all the different groups, but then you're going to get a different message. You're going to eventually have to synthesize all that into something that's going to help you. We have a lot of people that are involved, a lot of people that know how to do public involvement very well in the area. We need to involve them, and we, again, need to have a wide variety of techniques that are really suited to reaching large audiences in a large area. We have, and Michael talked a little bit again about the goals that we have. Effective communication. It's got to be proactive. It's got to be effective, timely. We have and some of these are common sense. It's trust and understanding. That's a hard thing to get a lot of times. There is an inherent attitude a lot of times of distrust in what we do. How do you finally get to the point where the public is really trusting? They may not agree, but they can understand what we're trying to do. Collaboration. Collaboration, not only partnership with the government, civic organizations, other interested parties. You need to be inclusive. You need to be resourceful. And I think we have the group in the RP3 advisory group Michael talked about that can do that. But meaningful input where you're really getting how people really feel. And not only having that input coming into you, but again, really seeing, it's got to be put together right by staff a lot of times and say, this is what is really important, and really using it actively within the decision-making process. We have, I think, 3 very important outcomes here. Again, a consolidated entity. We really want to consolidate this process. Again, what TBARTA has, talked about that, the CCC, what they have to. They've been good programs, but we can do it better through one consolidated program to give, I think, a tighter message to the whole group. an attitude, and this is something we talk about regionalism all the time, to go from competition to cooperation. And that is a lot, it creates tension, cooperation, competition creates tension. We want to get around that tension too and work better together. And again, an equal opportunity to contribute to a meaningful process. Local knowledge is important. Local knowledge cannot be lost within this process. Address community concerns and strengthen engagement at all levels. We have a variety of tools. Michael talked about that a little bit. We got websites, events, social media, print marketing. These are all the new things that we're trying to bring in more effectively into the process. We have a set of action-oriented objectives. We have to have a clear program that we can actually then use all your people that are part of this RP3 group and bring them together. We have strategies and actions to help implement the plan. And then lastly, and we started the public hearing at the CCC board meeting on December 1. We had to have a 45-day waiting period, according to Michael. I believe we had 50 days. Pardon me? 64, even better. But again, we did not receive public comments, good or a bad thing. Either we did it right or people aren't looking. We want to be sure they're looking, and that again is part of the problem as we move forward. The important thing too, we are moving forward. And you're going to hear a lot about these things at the meeting today. We have the regional coordination structure. You're going to hear about that. We're looking at the regional transit development plan. Again, if we have the funding, Ray talked about that. We have a major regional long-range plan coming along. Again, all the MPOs bringing in their funding, their projects, everything that's going to go together in kind of a big hopper that becomes kind of really the umbrella for everything we want to do over the next 25 to 30-year period. That's got to be coordinated. And then we need to increase regional awareness. TB Next, I think, and the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan are doing a good job. But what the point is, we need to make sure we're looking at the opportunity for each one of these things to allow us to actually overlap, to actually coattail, to use these things, again, to get out a very broad message to a very broad audience. So it's ambitious. Can it be done? We think it can. And are there any questions from the board?
Any questions, Kathleen?
The only thing I would say is I don't think we do enough online. I think online communities, I think blogging, I mean, we don't visit online anymore, we live online. Everybody lives right here. Everybody has some sort of mobile device. And so to get real thoughtful input, there are ways to create communities online that are active, engaged. You don't have to go to a meeting. And I know some of this is generational in terms of participation, but from an active engagement, I think 90% of our outreach should be done with an online platform. And they will engage, they will respond, they will be active, they will give you opinions, they will give you feedback. You have to set the right platform. And I didn't hear enough of that in this whole presentation, so I don't know exactly. I mean, I saw the one page that you sort of flipped past pretty quick, and you had all the different taglines, which everybody has, but it's like really talking about creating the right platform for the engagement. Like one of the places that I do some work with, we have Facebook has this thing called Workplace. You can set up something that's specific to topics, specific to areas of interest, invite people to join, and then you have to give them data. You have to be, giving them information. But I think if we sit around waiting for people to find meetings and show up and everything else, it's just we're not going to get community input. So I don't know exactly how all this all fits together. I mean, I read the agenda, but that's just my takeaway from this presentation.
A very good point there too, and you're right, I did skip over it. Online, you live or die online on these things. People look at that all the time. But it's not only getting it, taking it in, it's getting it out there. It's getting the online message out there. But again, being very dynamically involved in it. You just can't put the message out online. You've got to really be working with that all the time. Different groups that work online, some better than others. But it, again, is engaging those groups actively. It really is. You're going to know, in all honesty, you're going to know whether this is working or not. I think we've set up a process where it really can work, but that is an excellent point. We will really take that into advisement.
Thank you. Other questions?
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. We now come to the public comment section on the presentations you just heard. The chair recognizes Tom Rask.
Good morning, Tom Rask, unincorporated Pinellas County. I'll go through these things in the order they were presented. I do agree with the priorities, except the RTFP. I'm a small business owner in Pinellas County and involved in transportation issues and other issues. For future project, I agree with all except the streetcar expansion. I want this board to know that Tampa already has light rail. It's called the streetcar. If you don't believe me, look in Wikipedia. They have a list of light rail systems in the United States, and Tampa is the worst performing in terms of total ridership, boardings per mile of lines, and other key metrics. On the issue of public participation, I'm glad I got a chance to talk to Mr. Case before the meeting. I expressed some of my concerns. I've heard from Commissioner Benak and Ms. Shanahan. They also had some concerns. Mr. Pasco said you live and die by online. Just so you know, that the clock hasn't started, so I don't know how much time I have here. Yeah, it's okay. I'll take all the time I can get. And Mr. Pasco said you live and die by online, and that's true. And last week, a PSTA employee received a letter of instruction, also known as a letter of reprimand. And Ms. Long will hear about this on Monday at Monday's PSTA meeting. It was a PSTA employee who, on duty, accused a citizen of, quote, spewing hatred for making comments critical of PSTA and its board. And they also told a citizen that they were the worst kind of person, you make me sick, and you're a loser weirdo, followed by 4 exclamation marks, for making those comments critical of PSTA. And this occurred on PSTA's own Facebook page during working hours, this employee's working hours, okay? That citizen was me. They can't deter me. My free speech can't be chilled. But imagine somebody else looking at that and how they would react to that. So you have an 80-page report, a 32-page report. I said to Mr. Case respectfully beforehand, it's not leading to public engagement. You got to rethink it. Do less of that. I'd spend more time working on plans that you can actually get the public behind. You know, we'll talk about the RTFP later. So I think we need fewer reports, and we need to hear from actual citizens, poll random voters, because we've had 55 plans now. We're going to talk about this more later. We had 55 plans, and none of them have passed. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention last week's comment in the Tampa Bay Business Journal that Mr. Buckhorn, mayor of Tampa, made, where he said, I'm tired of debating with people who think rail is some sort of UN plot, referring to the no tax for tracks sort of community activists as bathroom bloggers and trolls. This is the same Buckhorn who, ahead of the 2014 Greenlight referendum, said, and the Polk one, I need these referendums to pass because the momentum out of Pinellas and Polk will allow us moving into 2016 to really come in with a lot of support. Well, those referendums both failed overwhelmingly. Yet on election night 2014, he said, any future transportation plan, quote, it's got to include bus, it's got to include rail. And that led to the failed effort in 2016 in Hillsborough. And just another thing, Mr. Buckhorn on February 12th last year said on Channel 8 that people are being, and he said it in this tone of voice, they're being, quote, persecuted and prosecuted for being Muslim. This hurts not only his credibility, it hurts this agency's credibility and any other board he serves on. I'll wrap up here. If someone is actually being prosecuted for being Muslim, you think that he would be able to point to an example. This kind of rhetoric that he engages in, and I'm glad he's not here because it makes it less awkward for me to say these things, this kind of rhetoric chills public engagement. It's not helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rask. Chair recognizes Sharon Calvert.
Good morning. Regarding the project list, I support all the 3 funded projects, the Howard Franklin Bridge, the Suncoast Parkway 2 extension to Citrus County, Gateway Express. On the unfunded list, I have grave concerns regarding the Regional Transit Catalyst Project, which was just announced, and regarding seeking right-of-way funds for the CSX corridor. I believe this is the cart before the horse. In your future regional projects, I have a concern regarding the streetcar and the Central Avenue BRT. Those aren't regional projects, so I'm not sure why they're in your regional list. Regarding your public participation program measures, there must be the utmost transparency when any board member, but especially when 2 or more board members are dealing with special interests and lobbyists. Invariably, we have seen regional transit agencies across the country. The result has been very costly transit projects and tax hikes. And we experienced, when I was in Hillsborough County in 2010, TBARTA spent a lot of taxpayer money on the so-called education, with what they called education. But in my opinion, they were skirting electioneering laws. I also ask that all your meetings be video recorded. I believe this one is. I think going forward, all your meetings should be. And regarding your Citizens Advisory Committee, looking back at the minutes, the attendance is dismal. This board needs to select a brand new CAC. You need to appoint brand new members who will be active members. And while it's voluntary, there needs to be some discipline and accountability regarding attendance. So I suggest you open this board up to all new applicants. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Calvert. Is there anyone else wishing to make public comment? Did you submit, if you could submit a card to staff, that would be great. Okay, the chair recognizes Mr. Black.
Thank you, Chair. Board members, I was listening to the presentations that were being given, and it seemed to me that the questions that Mr. Pasco was raising is the question of regional versus local, and I don't think that that's the right comparison. I think we should be considering individual liberty. Do you know my needs? Can you meet my needs in a timely manner, even if you did know my needs? How long will you make me wait to learn whether my needs fit in your plans and your goals before you can tell me whether you can meet them? See, when I have a need, I look at my budget and I decide, can I fulfill this need now, or do I have to wait another month? And I know that within minutes because I know what I need and I know what my resources are. And that's regard to all of my life, my food, my transportation, my shelter, the shelter of my family, their clothes. Innovation doesn't come from government. Smartphones didn't come from government. And I realize that government regulates lines and transmission equipment and funded the creation of the internet, but the content, the programming, that stuff's not government. That's individuals saying, hey, I think I can do this better, and I think that people would be served better by the way that I'm doing them. People are choosing to take Uber rather than to take buses. When I was a taxi driver, people would pay me $8 for a ride that they would pay $2 for the bus for, because getting to where they needed to be on time was more important than saving the money. And the bus didn't run on their schedule, the bus ran on the bus's schedule. And that's not convenient when you need to get home from errands to get ready for work, to turn around and get back out the door and be to work on time. So people have chosen to stop riding the bus because it takes 2 hours to get to where they need to be, and start riding Uber because it may cost them 2 to 5 times as much, but it's saving them time and allowing them to work that extra hour. People will let you know what they want by what they're willing to pay for what services are offered. People are paying for Uber, people are paying for Lyft, people are refusing to ride buses, people are even choosing to call taxis and ride-sharing services over ambulances. The end of the Hillsborough PTC was a good thing, and it's sad that it took state action to make it happen. The end of TBARTA will also be a good thing. Individuals don't need help from government to make decisions about what they actually need.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? None being heard, I will close the public hearing. Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am. Please come forward. Did you have a card?
Yes, I gave it to somebody.
Were you planning to speak? Your card was for the regular board meeting. Did you want to do the public hearing as well?
Might as well.
Okay, you're recognized, thanks.
We are here, Attorney Kelly and myself. We're both attorneys on First Avenue South in St. Petersburg, where a debacle of improvement has occurred apparently, and we are really concerned. It's just happened in the last 6 months. We had no notice of this, and the whole road has been dug up, and now a 2-lane bike traffic lane has been installed. This is First Avenue South between 73rd Street and Pasadena Avenue, and we're just absolutely chagrined. Ms. Pappas, realtor and business owner, she's put her property up for sale. Our properties are losing value. We've had our parking removed. It is an absolute debacle, and I've never, ever spoken at anything like this before, and I own the oldest law firm in St. Petersburg and been committed my whole 50 years of law practice to helping elderly people stay safe in all manner, and now they have to park on the opposite side of First Avenue South, crawl over these white, huge cement pads. Mr. Kelly's client has already fallen in the road, and we would like to see the whole thing reversed. So I don't know where we go from here, talking about needs, and we're sincere citizens, taxpayers. My landlord couldn't be here because he has eye surgery. His attorney will be here, and I'm sure somebody from the city will be hearing from that attorney, but our property values have gone down because of this. And we're good citizens, and, you know, why do we need 2 bike trails? And if that's where a trolley track is going to come, oh my goodness, I can't even imagine that. So, Mr. Kelly, do you have anything else to add?
Please. Please fill out a comment card to give to staff so we have a record. You can do it afterwards. No problem.
That's the problem.
This is our first time at a public hearing of this nature, but my name is Samantha Cicchelli. I'm an attorney. My office is at 7127 First Avenue South. I own that building. I've owned it for 12 years. I guess it was about October, we received a notice on our door that there was going to be some road work done. That was the only notice we ever received about the proposed bike lane that was coming in. Apparently, there was a public hearing 15 years ago when it was decided that the bike lane could go in on Central Avenue. To me, that is not notice, that is not due process, that is not anything appropriate. It doesn't have any common sense attached to it. So basically, they took all the parking away on the south side of the street, or the north side of the street on First Avenue South, which is directly in front of my building, in front of Ms. Cutler's building, and all the other business buildings, without, you know, asking anybody there if that's what they wanted. And so we've had quite a number of problems as a result of the bike lane. And so if you're going to additionally put a bus lane in there, it's just going to compound the problems. The bike lane, I've seen maybe a dozen people riding the bike lane. It's mostly homeless people going from one place to another. We've had an increased situation with homeless people trespassing on our property. Yesterday we had to call the police on a homeless person who was drunk and sleeping on our, in the back of our building when clients were coming and going. It's definitely decreased the value of our property. There is public parking on the residential side of First Avenue South. That's where clients can park if they want to park on the street still. But I've already had an elderly client fall trying to cross the street and fell over the parking block. Now, what if there was a bus there? That person would have been run over. That's not acceptable, and that's not good. Now, you all are talking about transparency and communicating with the public. You know, if this was an example of how that's done, that was a massive fail. We didn't receive any notice, and if the public hearing was 15 years ago, that's before I even owned that building. And the building project was supposed to be on Central Avenue, so there was no way doing a title search that one could have found out that eventually there would have been a building project on First Avenue South. So whatever you're doing, if these projects are going to go forward and you're going to try to figure out who's using them, who needs them, who wants them, you have to include everyone in that conversation and give definitely the property owners and the people that are actually participating, you know, proper due process. I'm an attorney, I've been an attorney for 30 years. You know, I believe in the Constitution. Apparently, a lot of people that are involved in this and a lot of the systems that are set up are not done under that system because due process is not happening, communication is not happening, and figuring out, spending money to fund studies to how to do studies seems very nonsensical to me. You know, with all due respect. There are many, many good and easy ways to communicate with the public. You know, print flyers and put them on everybody's door. You know, that's very cheap. Somebody can, you know, run around and put flyers on every door, and people can comment, and they can do so online or in a public meeting, but we never had opportunity to do that about that one little project. And if you're going forward with all these other projects that are going to affect property owners and that really no one wants, you know, why are you doing this? You need to find out what people want, what's needed, what's going to be effective. I employ 6 people in this community. You know, I'm a small business owner, but those are 6 jobs. If my business goes out of business or I have to move elsewhere, I may have to cut some of those. That's not good for the community. So I respectfully request that, you know, first of all, we would like to have this bike lane reversed. It's silly. And if you're going to do anything on a very public corridor that takes people into the city and out of the city, First Avenue North and First South are very good venues for people getting into downtown and out of downtown when they live in other areas. You know, you're going to ruin that, and you're going to ruin economics for the downtown area and the corridors along there. So please do consider that as you're going forward with these projects. Thank you very much.
Pauline Pappas is on her way here. She had a meeting. She's already put her beautiful business building up for sale. And I don't know what my landlord's going to do, but I know it's really causing an economic problem. I employ 4 attorneys and staff. So we beg of you, if any of you have a suggestion, can this be undone? I mean, it's dangerous. So bless you and thank you for listening to us.
Thank you very much for those comments. Anyone else? Okay, none being heard, we will close the public hearing. I'll get the sense of the board. I would entertain either a motion to adopt all 3 priorities, participation adoptions, or to consider them individually, if that's the preference of the board. Is there a consensus to adopt all 3 together?
I move we adopt all 3 together.
Second. Second. It's been a motion, a second. Any discussion?
Yes, I have one question for
Kathleen.
I think one of the questions that was raised in the public comment, and I hope somebody gets back to these people. I mean, I don't know whose responsibility it is for the bike lane, and sounds like a city of St. Pete. But I mean, I hate to have people come up, it's the first time they've ever been in a meeting, and say, thank you, and they walk away. Like, somebody will follow up with you, and we appreciate you coming, you know. On the 2018 editions on the regional transit projects, I think it was Sharon raised it. You know, some of these are not regional, but they're in here. So what determines that?
I think the part she was referring was the future projects, and those projects are defined as not necessarily being regional, but they could be supportive of regional projects, which is why they're in a lower category. So there's 2 categories. There's regional and future regional. And those smaller projects are the future regional.
But they're not really regional.
They're supportive of regional projects. An example would be the Tampa streetcar would be a circulator for a regional transit system that would circulate people in downtown Tampa, that type of thing.
Yeah, I just think that muddies the
Well, I
water.
can tell you that these projects are all in your local MP
Right,
plans.
no, I know that. But I mean, it sort of goes to the clarification of what the goal is regional, and then we have some of these that aren't regional, it's not really fully explained that way, so I think we gotta be careful about
Right,
confusing
and I'll
the
tell you.
agendas
Yeah.
in terms of what
Oh.
we're trying to say,
Yeah.
and then inserting things that don't necessarily fall in line with what we're,
Well, TBARTA, long before I came there, has always had these levels of planning.
Right.
Part of the issue is in the smaller jurisdictions, they're never going to have any projects that are recognized as being important that might actually serve regional entities, and that's why that future regional was added for smaller projects that are supported.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Betsy, I think you were first.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, you know, these two attorneys who spoke about their real concern outside of their building, it's not something that we're acting on today. That is something that apparently has been in a plan in the city of St. Pete, and their issue is with the city of St. Pete, as far as I can tell. Can you confirm that, Ray? I want to make sure that we're not doing anything that would affect this issue.
It sounds like it has to do with the Central Avenue bus corridor, so it'd probably be PSTA and the city of St. Pete. Pardon me?
Part of the region, Central Avenue bus.
Right, but the design, the specific design issues that were raised are not part of anything that we would act upon here.
And it- Well, I want to clarify. So that was a project that apparently has been planned for a long time.
Yes.
If it's actually in the construction phase, so it's not in something we're approving today. Maybe I shouldn't have brought it up. I just want to make it clear that we're not acting on
Well,
something.
it's
that we're-
obviously some kind of local project because it was mentioned that there was barricades or something, you know, maybe it isn't related to the central, I don't know. It's obviously a city project though.
Yeah, we don't want to have a debate on that today, but we are sympathetic to everything that is said, and I think staff should review that,
Yeah.
given the importance of this decision, because we want public comment. We are here for you, not vice versa. So anytime we hear this, if we don't know the answer, we will refer it to the appropriate jurisdictions for determination and want to follow up on that. And thanks for bringing that, but we don't want to debate jurisdictionalities at this point. We want to follow our agendas.
Well, that's why whenever I vote, I want to make it clear that what I'm voting on is not something that has been brought up. We're not ignoring it as was raised. In terms of the issue of regionality, I know that we've had discussions about that before on some of these projects, and I can only address, you know, the one that we've had on our long-range plan, and it's 15th Street East, and it's a road that is the old US 301 corridor, and is an alternative roadway connecting Sarasota, Manatee, and eventually up across the bridges to Pinellas County. So where they may not appear to be regional because of the way they're described, they are in fact regional because people are commuting all the way from Sarasota up to Hillsborough County and causing the congestion that we have in our central corridor. So,
Thank you, Betsy. Commissioner Long?
Yes, and I'm very interested in this discussion going on right now, and while I don't want to belabor it out of respect for time, I think, you know, there's a couple things we need to pause and take a deep breath about, because first of all, to Ray's point about how this is the result of something that happened way before he got here. This is a brand-new agency with a brand-new mission, and I think we have to be very cautious that we don't mix apples and oranges going forward. Part of the critique that we get is that we are saying one thing and maybe doing another. And in this regard, I think our focus is on regional connectivity and transportation, and that's where we should keep it. And that there's too much reliance on the way things have been done and not the way we want things to be done going forward. So it requires somewhat of a new vision and a new way of thinking in terms of how we approach our problem-solving and decision-making. And I agree with everything that's already been said. These folks need to be followed up with, and quickly, to make sure that we're not ignoring any, comments or criticisms that are brought to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? None being heard, and I will echo that. TBARTA, as many of you know, was refocused by the legislature in their last session, and our mission statement has been narrowed to transit in the Tampa Bay region. Some of these other things are holdovers from the prior statute, but it will be the fundamental direction of this board to focus on transit and transit-related issues. So that going forward, I can't underscore that enough, that sometimes we can't go down different distractions when we need to stay on mission. So that said, I see there's still a pending motion to consider all of the three items together. There was a second. Is there further discussion or question? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion's carried. That concludes the public hearing. I'll entertain a motion for adjournment of the public hearing.
Move approval of adjourning the public hearing.
Second.
There's been a motion, a second to adjourn. Any discussion? Any objection? Motion carries. The public hearing is adjourned. Would anyone like to take a 5-minute break prior to convening the board meeting?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Adjourn for 5 minutes. Huh?
It seems like, regardless of.
She is on the, okay. She's on next, or she's on this one. I'll give you these other cards too.
Design and implementation of that plan.
Well, the TBARTA use operatives, they used to have a master. Normally that was going to be large, large.
Oh, yeah. This is the latest quarterly data before the budget. You know what? We're not that anymore. I'm glad we agree on something, because I know last time you saw me over 2 hours.
Well, I mean, I just don't, I think there's ways to.
If their fingers were in it, designing it.
And likewise too, one of the things about the
Yeah, and I appreciate your comments sincerely.
Right. So it has a 30-year transportation plan. It has a 5-year funded transportation project list. And what that funding does is being on those lists enables those road projects to receive federal committee to coordinate regional projects.
So that's sort of like.
Yeah, but now administratively they're
overlap.
They're administratively sort of under us, but I was interested in what was going to happen. If this board rejects the CCC's what does that actually do? Well, the problem is, in order for them to be on the list, they have to already be in the 5-year funding plans for the individual NGOs. Not even sure really have an effect, because those NGOs by statute have authority to decide what's in their project. So it's almost like some of the figures in the last 2 days you're talking about to make those comments before you've seen leaders of the council, or else commission, or maybe even a Nelson County NGO. To me, as I'm hearing you talk, it sounds like it's sort of related. So, and again, that's without the intersection you're talking about. But
Well, it also seems like maybe at this point, like having consider, say, local initiatives, funding this regional, even though, right, you can argue that they're supportive of, is that you're going to use something. Sure, right, and you're gonna get the criticism, maybe rightly so, if you're putting in the plans, we're all ostensibly approving the rationale for, regardless of the economic consequences of the choice, right?
Interesting is this person planning in project.
Hey, your predecessor.
The local government there is like, we don't want to.
Correct.
So, what will stop is the local government, which is good funding sources.
I've been in this position 7 months now.
I don't know if their funding was city or county. Technically speaking, it's state.
I'm fairly new to DOT. I was in the private sector my whole career, so I've been.
But I was actually looking at that as they're talking.
Just a couple
And
of
it
years.
says, coordinate transmission. It's coordinate transmission project, private committee. So this, chairs in the committee. So almost like the same question, maybe wonder, the local chair of the part of this committee. Bring the private sector, all agree to it.
Well,
So it's almost
exactly.
like
Get some things done.
And if you're Pinellas County, everything's, I mean, not defining anything necessarily, you're defining things with Pinellas County.
they do argue.
Yeah, we moved that up. We actually are gonna let that to construction this year.
Airport's making it.
It's not.
Well, it's one of the number one bottlenecks. It's one of the number one bottlenecks. That's certainly one of them. Southbound 275 to
What's that?
I-4 is
Yes,
another one
yes.
we're trying to figure out.
I'm going to,
One thing that everybody else is
Oh, no, I didn't.
even though technically it's outsourcing, nothing we do can go forward.
no, it's important, I know that, yeah, but I think we have to say. Yeah, are you gonna just mention those briefly, and I'll say we'll take them all together?
Yep.
All right.
Another lane each direction.
Michael.
I'm gonna refer to
Okay. Oh, okay, so you're,
Run, and we're also gonna widen some of the bridges north of there. So that comes in, then you've got the problem there. And that outlet, that double loop ramp, have more room to merge over. So, the double loop ramp comes from the airport area. This comes around to go north. Once you get past that 2-lane section, you put the 3 in, then you've got to worry about those 2 lanes coming in. So we're going to widen those bridges, couple of a few bridges there, give it more room to merge back in. So, yeah. All right.
Could everyone proceed back to their seats, please?
I know.
Nonsense. Yeah, I know, Saturday night, after you, and
Everyone back? I'll now call the board meeting to order. Sue, can you take the roll, please?
Jim Holton,
Here?
Melanie Griffin, Cliff Manuel, Michael Miller,
Here.
Commissioner Wade Dukes, Commissioner Pat Kemp,
here.
Commissioner Betsy Bennett,
Here.
Commissioner Catherine Starkey, Commissioner Karen Seal, Mayor Rick Kreisman, Mayor Bob Buckhorn, Kathleen Shanahan,
here,
Commissioner Janet Long,
here.
Secretary David Gwynn,
Here.
Secretary Elfie Mendel.
Yeah, Melanie's back as well. We have a quorum?
Yes, sir, you do.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Welcome to the board meeting. We are now going to have general public comments that were not limited to the items discussed before, but can come discuss any business coming before this board or anticipated to come for this board. So we will take those now in order. Joshua Black is recognized first.
Me again. I will say, I've heard of TBARTA before, never been to a public meeting before. Moved to St. Petersburg about 10 years ago, a little more than 10 years ago, and I first was riding PSTA. And it got very inconvenient. The buses weren't available when I needed them. The buses weren't quick enough when I needed them to be, so I got a bicycle. And I got pretty good at riding a bicycle, and helped me maintain a job for 2 years when there wasn't a bus route directly to where I worked. At the time, I was working at that Cracker Barrel on 54th Avenue, and I lived in Pinellas Park, right, US 19 and Park Boulevard. There's no bus route there. Closest you can get is probably number 11 to 28th Street and 54th Avenue, but that bus doesn't run very often. Eventually, I got a car, and it's a lot safer to drive rather than riding on a bicycle that can get a maximum of 20 miles an hour, where the speed limit is about 35. I keep hearing, well, we need to improve the system so we can get people out of their cars to reduce congestion or whatever it is. My car led me to other opportunities. For me, a car is a capital good. It's something that I need in order to make money. So even if you had me a bus that would have gotten me to work on time back then, eventually, when I moved on from that job, I was going to need a car anyway. And what I do today requires me to have my own car in order to be able to do the job that I have. And it's a job that pays me significantly more than I made when I was a waiter at Cracker Barrel. So all these efforts to reduce the number of cars on the road are going to fail if they're done by central planning. Because what you're not doing is you're not addressing the needs of the individual, and you're not seeing why people make the decisions that they make. You're just seeing people make decisions that you don't like, and you're trying to get them to make other decisions, but you're not able to get into their minds to see what they actually need to understand why they're making the decisions that they're making. And it's a fatal flaw of central planning, and it won't change.
Thank you, Mr. Black. Chair recognizes Tom Rask.
Tom Rask, unincorporated Pinellas County. I echo Mr. Black's comments. I want to talk mainly in this general public comment period about the RTFP because it's not an action item later today. You're going to have a discussion. And this handout was given out last week in this very room when the plan was unveiled. And I want to draw your attention to, under mobility ridership, make sure you read the fine print where it says note. They're projecting 3.3 million riders, or trips they call it. They say FTA formula for calculating mobility multiplies trips made by transit-dependent riders by 2. So that means that if every single one is a transit-dependent rider, however you define that, the actual number of trips is 1.65 million. It's very questionable whether you're going to get 3.3 million trips, however you calculate it, because Hillsborough already has a BRT. It broke ground 6 years ago. It's called a Metro Rapid. And it last fiscal year, it had 497,000 trips. Now, a trip is not the same as a journey. So someone takes a bus, changes a bus, and then goes on. That's 2 UPTs, unlinked passenger trips. They're counted twice. And there's also a real flaw in this plan. You'll see that they refer to population density, 4,450 per square mile. And the assumption here is that people will walk to the station, that the area is going to develop around it. As soon as you make people take a bus, to get on a bus and then maybe go on a BRT to another destination, then have to take another bus. You're losing their interest. They're not going to be interested. And Mr. Eggers, who was a county commissioner in Pinellas County last week, at the TMA meeting, talked about basic math. And I tried to explain that, and I have made a little simple diagram here, which I'd be happy to give to any if you want, why this is a problematic plan based on the assumption people are going to walk there. If this is if you think of this as a 1 square mile circle, and this being the radius, that would mean that if people are willing to, that this radius here would be about 0.56 if this were miles, if this was a 1 square mile circle. Now, if you assume that people are willing to walk half a mile to a station, then the catchment area is about 0.78 miles, square miles. And you multiply that by the population density and you multiply by the number of stations, you get to 36,700 people. Now remember that streets don't go radially into a bus station. We're on a grid pattern. So skipping all the math because I'm running out of time, if you assume people are willing to walk a quarter mile, your catchment population for this entire line that's being proposed, all 21 stations, is only 9,200 people. So what percentage of those are you going to get to ride this line? There is no way this is going to do 3.3 million trips per year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rask. Chair recognizes Sharon Calvert.
First, I would like to ask you to update your guiding principles to include that your principal stakeholder is taxpayers. I think it needs to be very clear, documented, all agreed on that that is the case. This, I don't know if you can see, but this, I think you were talking about the MPOs and the CCCs and the TBARTA. And this is the chart that I think was the way it was, because that's the way it was, when TBARTA was a transportation authority. TBARTA is now a transit agency, and the MPOs is all transportation. I think this is an organizational structural problem, and I think it needs to be relooked at and needs to be fixed. I'll reiterate again that I hope the TBARTA will solicit new applicants for their CAC. Regarding the regional BRT proposed by Jacobs last Friday, that project does not need TBARTA to build it, implement it, or operate it. Cross-county bus service is already there. It's operated by our local transit agencies. Taxpayers don't need to pay for another transit agency to operate such system. Innovation is decentralizing transportation and transportation options. I would like to see a comparison of the proposed BRT with express service on managed lanes. It's the same corridor and the same route. Regarding the MPO regionalization study, I oppose regionalizing the MPOs. That's not required anymore, as President Trump signed into law, eliminating that rule. But there was a survey done at the September TMA meeting for live polling. But the survey, if you're going to use it again, was really geared toward providing positive responses. And there was only a couple of citizens in that meeting. Everyone else was a TMA member, a staff member, somebody with a taxpayer-funded entity or special interest. I'm not sure that audience really gave a valid view of the general public. And then last but not least, I hope that the board does not become the founding fathers and mothers of a regional tax. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Calvert. Chair recognizes Tom Nucera.
Good morning, members of the board. My name's Tom Nucera. I head up 4 LLCs that were set up over the last 2 years to provide a free enterprise solution to our traffic congestion utilizing 21st century technology developed by our vendor, SkyTran. On Wednesday, 8 of us from the Beachtran Clearwater LLC team attended a meeting over at Kennedy Space Center with Space Florida. the outcome of that meeting is very encouraging for our ability to team up with Space Florida to further the development of a pilot project that will go from Clearwater to Clearwater Beach. The last time I spoke before this board, it was back when Paul Steinman was the head of FDOT, the secretary for District 7 of FDOT. And at that time, I'd made the request that I'd like to make a presentation to this board of what we're proposing, what this is all about, and what this can mean for our region. And at that time, there was a lot going on with the reorganization of TBARTA, and now with the pending legislation, I guess, to obtain some funding for this organization. We are very pleased with the relationship that we've developed with TBARTA through their management, their executive director, and others. And I'd like to conclude my remarks right now by just saying that I was personally saddened a bit when I read that Ray Chiramonte is going to be resigning next year. And I just hope that we can end his tenure on this important regional board with something that's truly outstanding, and it comes from the free enterprise sector, not necessarily from the government sector. And so I thank you, and I look forward to the opportunity to make a presentation in the near future.
Thank you, Tom. The chair now recognizes Samantha Tichella. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. No? Oh, she's already spoke. Okay, thank you. Karen Giroux.
Good morning, board members. My name is Karen Giroux, and I live in Hillsborough County, and I'm a licensed professional engineer. Until recently, I was also on the HART board, where in December of 2015, we were told HART would be leading a premium transit study to determine what is cost-effective and what is most useful in meeting the transit needs of the Tampa Bay commuters. Along the way, the purpose was subverted into identifying a suitable project for federal funding. Prioritizing projects to fit federal criteria isn't the way to plan optimal transit solution for our region, and worse, can even cause the wrong solution to be locked in permanently, because once you accept federal dollars, you're in Hotel California. You're in, but you can never check out. History tells us that choice riders will adopt transit when it is faster and cheaper than other modes of transit. The fastest and cheaper transit alternative is one I don't believe was even wholly considered in this study, and that is the express bus on managed lane. By the way, I drove here down the Veterans in an express managed lane, and it's wonderful. The advantage of this concept is that the costly burden to TBARTA of providing a fixed guideway is removed completely, as regional express buses would be able to navigate the managed lanes at no cost. Managed lanes allow buses to navigate the interstate at a guaranteed minimum speed of 45 miles an hour, even during peak commuting times when the general purpose lanes are operating at significantly lower speeds. While the most feasible project to be presented today has reduced the fixed guideway cost significantly, and that's to be commended by using the shoulder and utilizing the managed lane on the new Howard Franklin Bridge, there's still high costs associated with this project that TBARTA would incur, such as shoulder widening, ramp treatments, signage, and striping. These costs go away if these buses operate instead in managed lanes. While I was relieved we hit the reset button on managed lanes when it became evident that the existing general purpose lane on the bridge was to be converted into a toll lane without adding more capacity, that particular issue has now been resolved with a new bridge plan, and managed lanes should be back in contention. Another factor to consider is the transition to autonomous vehicles in a few short years. Autonomous vehicles make longer commutes tolerable and will reshape development patterns, and the federal land use criteria is likely to change with it. But the biggest change of all will be the competition that private fleets of driverless rideshare vehicles pose to the current public transportation model. Public transit costs 90 cents per passenger mile and can't compete with driverless rideshare costs of between what is believed to be 6 and 25 cents per passenger mile that take passengers home, not left at far-off transit stations. Apple, Google, Apple, Google, and Uber are competing to implement this technology, which also fits seamlessly into the managed lane concept. Please consider express buses and managed lanes along the Wesley Chapel to St. Pete corridor. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments, Karen. Chair recognizes Evelyn Cutler. Did Evelyn speak already? Is there anyone else wishing to make general comments at this point? Okay, none being heard, I'll close public comment. The next item is consent agenda items, and Ray, would you briefly go over those? And I would like, if no other board member does not have a problem, to consider those as one motion.
Okay, the first item is simply your minutes from the last meeting. The second item is adopting an alternative billing process with FDOT support to help with our invoices to enterprise leasing with the van pool program, and making this available for TBARTA to use. And the third item is receiving the next commuter services grant for our commuter services program.
Does any member wish to discuss any of the items individually?
Move approval, Chair.
Second.
There's been a motion, a second. Any objections to the motion? All in favor signify by saying aye. 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 Consent item is approved. We'll now turn to committee reports. The chair is happy to recognize Whit Blandon.
Good morning, Ms. Chair and members of the board. Whit Blanton, Executive Director of Ford Pinellas, and I'm here to give a brief report on the Chairs Coordinating Committee meeting that we had on December 1st. We had a joint meeting with the Tampa Bay Area Transportation Management Area Leadership Group on that same meeting because we were discussing the regional priorities, and you've heard that report. They were approved by the CCC board for your consideration. We also updated the CCC interlocal agreement among the MPOs in the Tampa Bay area. And as you know, this covers a number of MPOs, the core MPOs of Pasco, Pinellas, and Hillsborough, as well as the adjacent of Sarasota, Manatee, Polk, and Hernando Citrus. We also, I wanted to talk a little bit about the 2018 Gulf Coast Safe Streets Summit. That is scheduled for February 27th at the Glazer Children's Museum in downtown Tampa. It's a cost of $60 per person to register. It's an all-day event addressing some of the strategies to improve the safety of our roadways for every user. And we have speakers that include Leah Shaman, who's the president of the Vision Zero Network, Ryan Gravel, who led the development of the Atlanta Beltline, which is spurring a lot of economic development in the Atlanta region. We have a mayor's panel, including Mayor Rick Kreisman and Mayor Kim Leinbach. And we have an FDOT secretaries panel scheduled for that day to talk about some of the complete streets work that the Department of Transportation is undertaking. So I encourage everybody here to consider attending that meeting on February 27th, again, in Tampa. The third point I wanted to reference that we covered at that meeting is the ongoing efforts of the several MPOs in our area to develop a long-range transportation plan jointly. And this is going to be a little bit different animal than we've done in the past. Historically, the MPOs developed their own long-range transportation plans and then came together to align those plans sort of at the end as they were put together. And this time, we are initiating those efforts jointly with the three MPOs for Pasco, Pinellas, and Hillsborough, and then we will coordinate the development of a broader regional long-range transportation plan with our adjacent MPOs. They're on a slightly different cycle for adopting their plan, so we aren't on the exact same deadline to complete that. This is significant, and I guess I'd like you to think about this in the context of a three-ring binder analogy that I've been using, where the first 50 pages of this long-range transportation plan will be the regional document, and anything that we want to change or amend or advance needs agreement of all three MPOs to do that. The next 50 pages of that three-ring binder, and it's going to be a lot more than 50 pages probably, will be consider the inserts for each of the respective counties. So Pinellas, Hillsborough, and Pasco would then insert the plans that speak more specifically to the needs within each county. Because as you know, we are dealing with two levels of transportation, regional and more local or countywide needs. And we are also coordinating our public outreach efforts, both digital and in person. We are going to do a whole host of activities related to values assessment, outreach, engagement, and I think we'll have a very robust effort to do so. We'll be looking at some land use and transportation scenarios as part of that effort, and certainly some financial scenarios too. And as I mentioned, we'll also be ensuring that we're coordinating with the broader 6 MPO area beyond just those 3. We also talked about our unified planning work program. That is our budget and work plan for the MPOs, and we are incorporating into that a regional element so that we are undertaking joint planning activities for all of the MPOs at a regional level. And I think this is something that you all have expressed a desire for us to do, our boards have expressed a desire to do, and I'm really excited that this is a departure from how we've done things in the past and does tend to get us to a better alignment on how we plan and develop our priorities in this region. So with that, I'll open it up to see if you have any questions about that. We do have to adopt our long-range plans by November of 2019. So the next year, year and a half is going to be very interesting, and we look forward to incorporating as best we can the plans that are being developed through the Regional Premium Transit Feasibility Plan as well as the Tampa Bay Next effort.
Thank you, Whit. Any questions for Whit? Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Chair now recognizes Melanie Griffin for her report on the Policy Committee activity.
Mr. Chair, the Policy Committee met this past Friday, or a week ago Friday, with a full quorum or full attendance. We had Commissioner Kemp, we had Commissioner Long, myself, and Cliff Manuel, who are all in attendance. And at the outset, one thing that I'm not sure if the chair wants to address now, given time constraints, but just to put on your radar, if it's not already there, that we are, quote unquote, down a commission member with losing our Pasco County representative. So I'm not sure if you have anybody in mind that you may want to add to our committee, or if you want to table that to a future meeting.
At this juncture, I would like to point to Commissioner Starkey to that, representing Pasco County. She'll be added to your commission, and anyone else that would like to be on the Policy Commission, please, Kathleen, you would express an interest. Would you enjoy being on that committee as well? Kathleen Shanahan would love to join that committee as well. So
we'd enjoy having you. Wonderful. Okay, so with that then, there were 3 main topics that were considered at the Policy Committee meeting this past week. The first being the job description for the new CEO. As we know, Ray's contract expires in February, and at the December meeting he expressed a desire to honor about that date, to not reapply for the position. So we are in a position where we're looking for a new CEO. So we consider the job description, the process, and if we want to have a search firm that helps us for the recruitment of that candidate, and if so, which one. And I'll focus on the last topic first, because it really took a lot of the time in terms of looking at the search firms. I know there was a lot of discussion about that at our December 8th board meeting. And so with that, in advance of the meeting, there were several people that had looked at various entities that might be able to help us with that process, and they all came from the PSTA contract. That there are 7 entities that PSTA has contracted to work for, with in its recruitment efforts. We did consider whether there are additional entities that we should be considering beyond that list, including reaching out to people who are involved in APTA and other community organizations and partners. There were no additional entities that were identified, so certainly while we'd welcome any additional entities that the committee should be considering from board members and or the public, and of course staff, we are right now laser focused on that 7 entity PSTA list, simply because it does seem to be, quote unquote, the cream of the crop in terms of transit recruitment entities, if the board would like to engage one. And so with that, there were several, while we were able to present a lot of information to the committee in terms of those 7 entities, what their contract rates are, and what they are able to offer in terms of services, the expenses that they'd be seeking in terms of reimbursement if we were to choose to engage them. There were additional questions, as you might imagine, that were raised during our policy committee meeting. And so to get feedback, A, fill in the board, and then B, get feedback on a few of those things. The first thing that came up was, A, how did PSTA decide on those 7 entities, what qualities, excuse me, do they offer, to the contracts that are at issue with those 7 entities. And then 3 is that recently, as many of us know, or all of us know, HART did engage Kreisenthrup, which is one of those entities, for its CEO search. And so then the question was raised, how did HART select Kreisenthrup as the entity of the 7 that it felt to be best to help them? We thought if we were able to get those 3 pieces of information in terms of selection notes and the contracts, it might be a way to not reinvent the wheel and get a plethora of information that would be digestible easily for the TBARTA board and particularly the policy committee to look at. So I had a conversation yesterday with our attorney, with Cameron Clark, about how to best go about getting those records, and we discussed that a public records request or even an informal request, since we are sister agencies, it might be best through Cameron. But want to make sure that we're not going off on a tangent here, so certainly wanted to put this on the board's radar. And Mr. Chair, I don't know if you want to give us verbal feedback or if you want to take a board vote, but we do think that would be helpful to get that information in advance of our next committee meeting.
I certainly think that's a good idea, and a threshold question I had that I raised with council is whether we are able to piggyback on PSTA's contract or whether we have to do an independent RFP, and I know there's a threshold there. Council, can you comment on the status of that research now in terms of the procurement procedure?
The threshold is 35,000. It's Category 2 procurement under Chapter 287, which is this agency's subject to. The primary function of having an RFP process, once you get across a certain threshold, is mainly the public interest in ensuring a fair process, ensuring that all options are considered, there's no favoritism being shown to any entities, saving public funds. Generally, piggybacking can be done because, in essence, what's happening is you have one entity that's engaged a process.
Is your mic on? I think there you go. I think
it was
flashing, and then I'll hit this button here. There you go.
Generally, when an agency piggybacks, it's because some other entity has already done a search process, and so even further public funds are being saved by piggybacking onto that process and not basically duplicating the same action. My read of the statute would be I can't think of a reason why we would be prevented from piggybacking. However, I would like to take a look at, as Ms. Griffin stated, I'll take a look at the documents that PSTA and HART, if they're piggybacking, they're going to have things like scope of work, they're going to have job description, things of that nature that need to be defined. Those may be substantively similar to what this board has in mind, but this board also may want to define those things further to make refinements that may ultimately mean that piggybacking, you might need your own RFP essentially if you're going too far afield of what their search was. But I think all that stuff should be pretty readily discoverable through those documents, and once this board defines the process it wants to do going forward and job description, scope of work, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think given the time constraints, we need to investigate both alternatives there and refer this back to the policy committee to really look into that, and then also to move forward with the firms listed and make inquiries about those. So.
Yes, if I may, Mr. Chair. So, and we're all in lockstep, because actually point 2 on my own little agenda here for going over our progress this past time was, can we utilize the PSTA contract and the need to address the RFP process of over 35,000? That was part of the discussion that council and I had yesterday, as well as there was further discussion then about refining the job search and process and what assistance we may or may not be able to get free of charge from these entities. And so those are all things that council is looking into, both the public records request for the 3 groups of information that we mentioned earlier, as well as these research questions, with the goal of having our next policy committee meeting either the week of February 12th or February 19th. It's yet to be scheduled, but to give council enough time to finish fleshing out these issues, hopefully have the public records returned so that we can be on track to further consider everything at our February policy committee meeting and keep it going. And so with that, one of the things to just round out this conversation that we discussed, since it has been raised, the job search and process, I'm not sure that, certainly we can look into it. I'm not sure how much we need to further consider whether we could use an entity free of charge for that process, because it does seem, as I've talked about it with council, and community partners, that the description and process is far enough along that we'll be able to discern whether we fit within the scope of work of the PSTA RFP, and yet that if we do choose to engage a search firm, they are more than likely going to want to help us flesh that out anyway as a part of their services. So I think we can probably avoid that potentially hairy question of, do we engage in a separate entity for free and then potentially have someone else help us in the recruitment process. I think we can just be laser focused on getting a search firm, if we want one, in short order, and then keep the rest of the process going. And so with that, I would like to encourage that if we can work through staff, either if there are questions, additional questions that board members have right now, obviously discuss in the sunshine, and or if we can work through staff and then have those raised in the sunshine at our next policy committee meeting. Certainly the goal would be, because as we discussed at the last board meeting, although it feels like we have a long time, that we have almost a year, really it could take months once we have a search firm to work through this process. So working backwards from that February date, given the length of time that it could take, as well as wanting to have, hopefully, our process solidified and in good shape by the end of the legislative session on, in March. I think it would be a good idea to keep things moving. So if we can get any questions, additional questions the policy committee did not think of on our radar, so we can do our homework in advance of the February policy committee meeting, we certainly appreciate it.
Yeah, I would concur completely with that, and I also, my experience with consultants is they're very negotiable in the laundry list of items you want them to do for you, and staff could in fact write some of the descriptions that they would probably write too, so we will look into that. But I think we have to move on this with all dispatch, and that's been the consistency of the board. Janet.
Yes, excuse me, and to add to Melanie's very comprehensive summary of our policy committee meeting, since our policy committee meeting, our county commission is also involved in a recruitment right now for our county administrator. And we decided to use Waters and Company, which is a vendor already licensed, approved and vetted through Pinellas County. And when we were talking about cost, that was one of the driving factors. Commissioner Seal can weigh in if I don't get it right. That we decided to go with Waters and Company because it was very reasonable at $20,000, and they have an all-encompassing platform that they work with, including doing the job description, the timeline, the value structure that we'll operate on from within the board. And I think if we move with post-haste to dot the i's and cross the t's, we should be in a position at our board meeting in February, I think that's what Melanie was referencing, to be ready to approve a search committee to go forward and get us going, so that shortly after the legislative session, we are really in a fine place to be looking at candidates.
Sure. Anyone else comments? Yes.
I'm a member of the policy committee, and I appreciate Ms. Griffith's addressing some of the issues that I had raised as part of the policy committee during our meeting last week. And I did want to point out, it sounds like some of those issues that I had raised have been addressed, and that's good. I'm glad that we consulted with counsel. I think we needed to consult with counsel. But there was an extended discussion, as you know, about procurement policies relevant to the job description and the recruitment of the new CEO. And as I said, it sounds like by involving counsel, that some of the concerns I raised at that meeting will be and have been and will be addressed. But I think that we did have issues specific to reaching out to an identified vendor, and I think it raises concerns. And so about our procurement process, some of those have been addressed, but I think that we need counsel present going forward with every policy committee meeting that we have, to have the advice of counsel at the time to understand about moving forward. And the board counsel is present today, so I'm asking that he assists the policy committee with moving forward. I also believe that we would benefit from, the policy committee would benefit, again, from an opinion of council about conducting meetings telephonically, sunshine, and other related manners. Both, I know that it's been explained at the meeting several times, but I think for us to have, I don't know, a memorandum issued or something else, I think would be valuable.
Chair recognizes counsel.
I'm not Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I can certainly do that if that's the board's wish. I sit with the Hillsborough MPO as well, and I do attend their policy committee meetings. Like I could attend TBARTA's policy committee meetings, obviously. And the second part would be, if it's the board's wish, I could certainly prepare a brief memo regarding the sunshine regulations. Most will be a summary of some court cases, but mostly it's Attorney General opinions.
I think it's a great idea, and I will just so direct you to sit in. I don't think this requires board action, but I think that's a very, very good suggestion. Commissioner Kemp, and procurement is something that you have to dot every I and cross every T, as we all know that from having served in government, so that's a very good point. Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
I had a question that I'd like included in your memorandum that relates to the under 35 discussion. A lot changes when your procurement goes over 35,000 and you move to a qualifications review where price and other things can't be considered. What do we have to do in the policy committee to determine whether we are or are not under 35? Because that's where some of the discussion did come up. We were thinking about reaching out to firms and saying, well, what could you do this scope for? And if it's $20,000, as Commissioner Longan mentioned, that's one process. But how do we set that budget and determine whether we're actually an under 35 scope of work that we're pursuing? And if it is under 35, what significant things change in our ability to discuss price as well as scope?
Okay. I can certainly.
Here, I'll get you again.
There we go, got it. I can certainly look at that as well. I think that you wouldn't be able to enter into an agreement with an entity where you have the cost going over the 35,000 threshold without having gone through the RFP process. So I don't know if there's potentially a range of costs that are being sought. If some are over and some are under, that would those that were potentially those estimates of cost that would be over. If it's all part of the same process, either you wouldn't be able to consider the proposals that were over a certain amount, or you'd have to go through an RFP process. So you could essentially, because I'm not party to sort of the estimate of cost for this sort of process, so it would be speculation on my part, but I can certainly take a look at that.
It's that Chairman.
Sure.
It's the speculation part that I'm concerned about. If the RFP went out and we determined as a board that we're soliciting services that are going to be under 35, then that would set us in a certain direction. And I know in our own county, RFPs go out all the time, and they're determined ahead of time to be an under 35 scope. So I'm sort of wondering, should we make that decision as a board that we're soliciting, or are we going to leave it open? If it's open, it's an RFQ, and I think we can't.
Sure, I think when the final decision is taken, I think it's a good idea that it's the full board that takes that decision. If in the end, you imagine you didn't went through an RFP process and the proposal that you like the best is one, because with an RFP, you're not bound by cost alone, unlike an invitation to bid. You can look qualitatively, and price is a factor, but not the only factor. And if you look at the proposals and you determine that the one you like the best is under that amount, it doesn't have any, you went through the RFP then potentially unnecessarily, but the fact is you're still able to go below the threshold. It doesn't affect anything per the statute.
If I may, so when we looked at the entities on the PSTA list who are potentially interested in partnering with TBARTA on the search firm process, the range there was approximately 14,000 to approximately 75,000. It was a very large range. I see some oohs and ahs. And I will say that there was somewhat of a mitigation of the range disparity in the sense that I think, if I remember correctly, all of them or most of them also then ask for expenses, and some of the lower proposals ask for higher expenses and vice versa, somewhat bringing those proposals a little bit closer than it sounds at first blush, but certainly there's a lot of disparity. And so part of what the committee did start to think about is it permissible to ask if that is a best and final offer, or is there room for negotiation on all of the offers? And that was one of the things that council and I discussed yesterday, was that, he would look into that And that is part of the reason that we want to actually request, not just how did PSTA, their selection notes of how did they select the 7 entities, but the contracts with the 7 entities, because we're unsure of whether there is room for negotiation or if we're bound by prices set forth in those contracts. And with that, I'll kind of wrap up by saying this, is that to Commissioner Kemp's point, and I appreciated all of her comments, at the committee meeting, that there were a lot of things that were raised on the fly, because this is, it's been a couple of years since TBARTA has looked at this issue. And so there were a lot of things that came up. To the best of my knowledge, I'm unaware of any board member reaching out to any entities in the past week. And so certainly, I think Cameron and I talked for a good almost 45 minutes yesterday. We put a lot of things together in terms of what needs to be looked at. We will be prepared for the policy committee meeting, but I do want to make sure that's on the record that we are being transparent in this process, and that a lot of, like I said, questions that were unanticipated came up, but we are addressing them and getting the necessary research so that everybody can feel comfortable moving forward above board in the sunshine. And my last thought, Mr. Chair, just to put it on your radar, is that I am presently scheduled to be in trial on February 23rd. So if I can't be here, I will make sure that there is someone who can, quote unquote, carry the torch in terms of hopefully getting this discussion before the board and voted upon, and then certainly relays it back to me to keep it going within the policy committee meeting.
Well, thanks for that great report. Any other questions of Melanie? Go ahead.
Well, I'm not sure my question is of Melanie, but the idea of piggybacking on another search, and I was a little bit confused about the whether or not we have to, in fact, have the same specific kind of job description. I mean,
No, not necessarily. No, just it would have to be relevant in some way, shape, or form. But no, of course not. Yeah, you'd have some flexibility there. I mean, the main value of the piggybacking is you're really trying to avoid the duplication of cost. That's all.
yeah, and I like that idea, but the job description is a huge part of this, and I know, having just gone through this for our own county administrator, that just even coming together on the job description for everybody needs to be on the same page. What is the job description? Have we done that? I don't recall, but maybe I've forgotten. I was trying to look through the notes. Have we all agreed exactly what the job description is?
So the job description was proposed first at the November policy committee meeting, and then again at or maybe it was the October policy committee meeting, then the November policy committee meeting. So I think it's come before the policy committee, and then now a third time in January. It came before the board at a minimum at the December 8th board meeting. In its current form, the only real feedback that we have received to date, and the board did task us with this at our January meeting, and we talked about it, was that under the requirements, the first bullet point addresses the education experience, both in terms of education and their years of experience in the industry, and or budget experience in terms of amount of money. And that was where the board expressed concern last time. To the best of my memory, I don't know if there were a lot of other concerns really expressed about the proposed job description. Now, that being said, to your point, there's not been a formal vote on it, and the thought of the committee was in January, we certainly continued discussions about it as directed by the board, but in terms of looking at what needs to be done first in what order, the thought seems to be that if we can nail down the search firm, that the description is fleshed out enough to be able to A, give the entity notice of what they're bidding on, and then B, for us to determine if we do fit within the scope of work that's being advertised or has been advertised, and that then, because it is a 3-page job description that has been, like I said, brought before us several times in different ways, and then once that entity is on board, hopefully as of our February board meeting, then that entity can help us with their experience, flesh it out, and then we can come before the board with a formal vote. Last thought is that council also had a very good recommendation yesterday that part of the value of requesting these selection notes and contracts from PSTA and HART is that their job descriptions used, they may have some keywords or phrases that we want to borrow from, and that would be another way to add value to our process as well.
Okay, and I just want to make sure that before we do move forward with anyone, that we have all agreed on what it is we're moving forward with. So the job description and everything to be laid out. So I would just like to see that in paper.
And can staff comment on where is that posted online? I know it was a part of our published our published agenda for this past week, so that'll still be available online.
You mean the exact job description that was taken?
Well, the job description in its current, quote-unquote, current form, as presented at the December 8th meeting for discussion, was again set forth in the agenda packet of the policy committee meeting last Friday. So would that still be available online for all board members to look at? And or if it's not, can it be made available online? So the request,
job description.
if we can repost the policy committee agenda and attachments online so that everybody, the public, staff, and the board has access to it, so that if you want to look at the job description, because again, what we would really encourage board members to do, as well as the public and staff, is that if you have additional questions that the policy committee should be considering in February, work through staff to get, so they can raise them, so that we can hopefully have a vibrant discussion and a vote at the February board meeting about a search firm.
Thank you.
You want the job description and the search process that the document you created?
Yeah, and my suggestion would be, just to make sure that everybody can see what was discussed and get the whole context, would be to just repost the whole meeting packet. I think that might be easiest than parsing it out.
Yeah, with an eye towards transparency, publish whatever the documents are available.
Because I think it was maybe a 30-page, I don't think it was a long, if I remember correctly, I don't think it was too voluminous or overwhelming for people to look at.
Any other questions? Commissioner Kemp?
Commissioner Benak, I appreciate you raising the issue of the job description. I had issues with the job description as it was written. And I do think that that is something that needs to come back before the board. I just didn't understand what process was being used, and I have very much concerns about that. So I think that that does, and I guess it sounds like we're kind of addressing that in some way, but that nothing will go forward until it has this full board approval and discussion. It's not as if we have, I mean, this is very important. TBARTA only has 4 employees. We're talking about the biggest change, and it really needs to come forward to this board for discussion. So thank you for raising that.
Cliff, did you have a further follow-up?
Quick comment. So in the piggybacking review that you're doing for us, what needs to be in common is how they procured a professional, not the job description. So if the job description's different for the person we're looking for, that's not going to affect our ability to piggyback. It would be, did they go through a similar procedure as what we're looking at doing in order to find a person? I want a clarification to make sure we're on the same page with that. Thank you.
You're on.
Okay. Yes, that's correct. An executive search is an executive search. So in the end, it's the procedure that's going to matter. The job description doesn't have to be, it's less relevant. It matters much more for the public records aspect that the board was asking for than it does to do with the process of the piggybacking.
Thank you.
And last thought, Mr. Chair, just so I can be prepared and do my homework, is that Commissioner Kemp, if there are concerns that you have in addition to what has already been discussed about the job description, if you can get those to us either right now or through staff before the policy committee meeting, because I've taken notes at each step, and I do remember you raising issues with the degree and experience and budget like other board members. There's nothing else presently on my radar that needs to be looked at with the job description. And again, once we have a search firm and these records, I know it will be further fleshed out, so it's coming before the board, but in terms of, looking at specific aspects of it, having a draft prepared for you to look at in February, if you can let us know if there are any other areas of the job description that you'd like us to be focused on.
And board members, if that's something that the board wishes to do, that's just fine. The key part about Sunshine would be there can be no give and take communication. If any board members, when they get to review a copy of the job description, they can mark up, make any comments they'd like to. You could send that to your staff, and staff can disseminate to the full board, but there can be no give and take communication between board members on that except at this setting.
And to be clear, that's what I am asking,
yeah,
is that we work, either come right now and or that we work through staff between now and then the policy committee meeting.
Because once it's submitted to your staff, it's then public record and anybody can request the documents, so.
Betsy?
Just can we have finalization of this perhaps on the next board agenda? Is that appropriate? I mean, will you be ready to have finalization at the February 23rd of this moving forward? Is that what our goal is?
Yes. We could, and one of the things that is again, synthesizing the voluminous information that came out last Friday, one of the thoughts I had is that my suggestion would be that to make sure that we're all on board of the same page, that we go ahead and finalize the job description with the caveat that once we engage a search firm, if they have further things that we should think about, that we'll be open to that. But to your point, then we're all on the same page about at least where we've done the best we can as quote unquote non-professionals in that recruitment area. I agree with you. I think that'd be very helpful to pass it with that caveat.
Right. I think we're pretty much all on the same page of what the task is now. And thanks for a very comprehensive report. Any further questions for Melanie before we move on?
Put it on our website, or anything like that, just what requirements as an agency we have.
In terms of public records, is that?
In terms of posting or promoting beyond the so-called 7 firms, so that there is an equal opportunity for anyone who wants to submit a proposal to submit such a proposal.
Sure. I mean, that sort of thing I think can be wrapped up in the discussion of the RFP process, because obviously anything that gets submitted as part of an RFP process is subject to public records. So I think that should be encompassed in the same process.
Well, I think we also need to look at, though, if we don't do an RFP, assume, I think the hypo needs to be changed, that assume that we are not, that we're gonna stay under 35,000, and or that even if we went over, that we could benefit from, PSTA, that we've obviously, quote unquote, said it on the record, both at the policy committee meeting and as here at the board meeting, we'd be open to considering it. But in terms of, to Sue's good point, how would other entities that were interested actually know about it if we weren't going to conduct an RFP process, or would we have to conduct an RFP process? So I just want to make sure that we're looking at that as well in a non-RFP setting.
Well, just to clarify, even if we weren't going to conduct the process, we can post our scope as a job, as a procurement on the website, so it's available for anyone who wants to look at it, even if it's like Cameron said, a request for bid.
But we're not going to know that until February 23rd. I mean, we aren't there yet, right? I mean,
In addition, I was going to say.
No decision has been made on this process at this time. Correct. So I don't think we need to do anything specifically now.
We're just getting the answers to the questions so that we're ready to hopefully present you with a very fleshed out report February 23rd and vote then. But to your point, yeah, we've just been proposing things.
Yeah, there's nothing actionable now, and please staff can confer with council so we can move on with the agenda. Now, if you have any further questions, Sue. Okay, thanks for all those lively and wonderful comments. I think we're moving this process forward, and that's ultimately what we want to get done. The next item, there are action items, and in an abundance, although there has been a prior public comment, I think due process requires that we give anyone that wants to comment on a specific action item the opportunity to do so. I know Mr. Rask has filled out a card. If anyone else wants to comment on either of these 2 action items, please fill out another card and give it to Sue or Michael now. So I'll let Ray present the action items, and then Mr. Rask, would you like to address one at a time, or would you like to address both? I think you do separate votes, so. I will give you 6 minutes, if you can do it for the sake of time, I will give you 6 minutes as if for each item, cumulatively. So Ray, if you can.
Okay, the first item is simply an amendment to our bylaws to allow us to just follow state statutes in our public notice, very simple. And the second one deals with the draft of the vision, goals, and principles that John Feliski gathered from the board workshop in December. You have them in your packet. I'm not going to go through each one of them. Just any comments on them? Assuming that they're pretty much okay, we would probably plan to bring that back for you to adopt that draft at the February meeting.
Okay. That said, we'll recognize Mr. Rask for public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Once again, Tom Rask, unincorporated Pinellas County, and I do appreciate the chair allowing public comment on this, and generally being, very liberal today with public comment, because no war is broken out in here. Citizens, I think, do have a lot of things to add to the conversation. The issue of public notice, which is item 1, is something, I'm not new to this issue with regard to TBARTA. Some of you may not have ever seen me here at a meeting before, but the public record shows that I have been involved. In late 2015, I sent then TBARTA counsel Don Kahn at Pennington Law an email about the fact that the notice required under Florida Statute 286-0105 was not included in the meeting notice. That is the disclaimer notice, whatever you want to call it, that's at the bottom of your second page that says that any person who wishes to appeal a decision at this meeting will need a record of it, and for that purpose may need a verbatim transcript. So that conversation or argument, frankly, at that time led to that being included, and I believe, Ms. Ebner can correct me if I'm wrong, this little line here makes me very happy. It says notice of public meeting. And I discussed this with Mr. Clark briefly before the meeting. That puts the public, just somebody walking by a notice board or looking online, it puts them on notice and makes them aware that they too can come to this meeting and they might have something to add that would help you. There's room here, make it bigger. Put it in the black side of a black box. Not a black box warning like on medications, but if there's room, always try to improve the notice. And these issues of notice and public record and all these things, they're really related. So as Mr. Pasco said before, if people can at least understand what you're doing and very importantly feel that the process is proper. I've said many times, I can live with a public policy outcome that I don't like if the process was good. But too many times we've seen with Go Hillsborough and others, the process got corrected. Very briefly on that point, in September 2015, I made a public records request for some emails, and when I didn't get them, I threatened to sue. And it turned out that Commissioner Hagan in Hillsborough County had conversations about Go Hillsborough outside of the sunshine. And on that point, I just want to make a minor point. I could be wrong on this, but Mr. Clark said that once you submit a marked up document to staff, it's a public record. Actually, it's a public record as soon as you mark it up. If any of you were to scribble notes on your meeting agenda, it's a public record. So please, I want to thank you for having a good process, and I encourage you to please continue with a good process. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those actually very salient comments. Those are helpful to us all. Okay. Mr. Chair recognizes Mr. Black.
I keep looking at, I'm new to all these different meetings. Generally speaking, most people work Monday through Friday. And the times that these meetings are occurring, some people can, look at their job and say, I got enough work done Monday through Thursday. I can take a couple hours off on a Friday morning to come to a meeting like this. And my schedule is flexible. I'm able to do that. I scheduled myself to be off today, and I'm able to make this meeting. But it makes me ask the question, what's the purpose of conducting a public meeting during hours that most of the public is at work? We need to have more opportunity to give public input if this is supposed to be something that the public owns. 9:30 a.m. on a Friday is very inconvenient for 70, 80, 90% of people living in St. Petersburg, in Tampa, Clearwater. And I'm sure there's some places where, there's more retirees and they can get up and decide on their day that they're going to do this rather than whatever else somebody else would want them to do. But most people cannot just say to their boss, hey, there's a public meeting today, I've got to be there. My recommendation for the future for public meetings is to consider having them at times where more people can actually attend them, so there can actually be more public input. I think one of the big reasons that you're losing on public input is that people don't have time out of their day, and it's going to cost them severely financially if they try to take that time to be at these meetings. Thanks.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Sharon Calvert.
I would just like to reiterate again regarding your guiding principles that due to some past history, I would ask that you update those principles to make it clear that the taxpayer is your stakeholder. Also, if you could include, again, all meetings should be video recorded, and I agree with the gentleman before me that having meetings at times when either you're not retired and a working professional can attend. Most of the meetings that I attend, I'm luckily retired, is with people, it's like the echo chamber. So you're not providing the opportunity for others to speak. And then Mr. Rath just wanted me to thank you for making a 7-day public notice. Thank you.
Quite welcome. Thank you. Anyone else wishing to make comment in this section now? What's that? On the first item or second? I thought you were going under both that were presented, but I'll give you time again if you want to comment specifically on this.
Yeah, because I wasn't sure you're going to have two separate votes. Again, Tom Raskon, Incorporated, Pinellas County. I did send an email to Mr. Shiramonte yesterday with a copy to the chair, specifically on the draft TBARTA Vision Goals, Principles, and Action Plan. And he wrote back, and I'm not, I'm not trying to give Mr. Shiramonte a hard time, but he said, I appreciate your comments, we'll certainly consider them in our actions. However, he didn't bring them up. There's one very important point, and that is that there's the absence of the word purpose from this. If you look at your agenda, it doesn't say purpose. Yet the document begins with purpose in bold letters. And the purpose stated is plan, develop, fund, implement, operate a regional transit system in the Tampa Bay region. End quote. That's stated without any reference to need or demand or anything. Furthermore, most importantly, the authorizing statute, Florida Statute 343-922, states your express purpose, this agency's express purposes. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but they begin with A, plan, implement, and operate mobility improvements and expansions of multimodal transportation. Now, I know you've been changed from a transportation agency to a transit agency. Those are your express purposes. My concern is that if you put a different purpose in this document, this draft document, that it's only going to create confusion. And I said that to Mr. Shiramonte in the email. I don't believe that the document cannot modify the statutorily stated purposes, and doing anything but stating the statutory purposes just creates confusion. So that's my comment about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Any others? Okay, none being heard, I'll close public comment on that. Let us move to the actions items. The first one is to approve the amendments to TBARTA's bylaws.
Move approval.
Second. Is there any discussion? Any objections to the motion? All those signify in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion carries. Next is to approve draft TBARTA Vision Goals, Principles, and Action Plan.
Move approval.
Second.
And just one item of discussion, I just want to make sure that Mr. Rath does realize that Mr. Shiramonte did immediately forward your email to the board. I wasn't sure if that was, if you knew that. So on the record, we did all get to immediately see it, and I think it was posted as part of the agenda meeting as well.
And we all have a copy.
Right, so I think we all have a copy, and then everybody else would be able to have a copy too, because it was made a part of the agenda.
The motion second, I think, Karen, you have a discussion point?
Just a question, and it's really towards our attorney, Mr. Clark. Based on Mr. Raff's comments, do we have to have our purpose as the same as the authorizing statute for TBARTA, or can we add the, I think it was the develop and fund a regional transit system, which is different from the statute? I mean, obviously, if we're going to operate it, we have to find a way to develop it and fund it.
Yes, the express purposes of TBARTA are in 343.922. They're extensive. They're a lot longer than the brief summary. I believe that the language that's before you is the language that was agreed upon by the board that sort of is a concise summary of the much longer text that appears in the statute. Remember, though, that the adoption of this purpose language, it's not binding in terms of being a law or an ordinance. It's basically what the board sees its function as and its interpretation of the statute and its statutory authority.
Thank you.
Good. Motion second. Any other questions, discussions? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Motion carries. We are now turning to presentation and discussion items. Chair recognizes Scott Lane from Stantec.
Well, thank you for giving me a few minutes to update you on our project here that you folks approved last year. I guess we have a presentation that's coming up somewhere. So this will be pretty brief, which you're probably happy to hear after a couple of hours in here. But we're really getting through the technical weeds at this point with this project. So I just want to give you a chance to kind of feel us out where we're at with this project. This, addresses a pretty important issue that's been going on today, I've heard, as well as in the past about regionalism and what it means and for these areas, these MPOs we're dealing with. The project, just in brief, very brief, really three big parts that we've kind of identified: existing conditions, a lot of data, some listening sessions with MPO staff, trying to get our feet underneath us, understand the conditions and issues that are in front of us. All this will lead into looking at peer studies, which I'll go into in a minute, looking at other organizations, other regions around the state and around the country that may have some insights for us that we can use to ultimately provide an idea for recommendations. How do we make things better? According to the issues that we identified. I think, were provided with a copy of a draft with a report. Looks kind of like this on the front. I will not go into all the detail with that, and it is fairly detailed. Has four parts, a little bit of a talk about regionalism and the way it works or doesn't work right now in the United States. A lot of graphs and numbers and charts and maps for those of you that love that. There was a very deep dive on the policy piece that is summarized in this report, a 50-page policy dive looking at state statutes and the implications of that for any kinds of action you're going to take for the MPOs. And then it's engagement, which goes all the way back really to May of 2017. Some of you may have attended that May workshop at Collaborative Labs that initially looked at this issue in depth. One of the things, as I mentioned, was really important. I can tell you, working around the country a little bit, that Florida has a lot of language about metropolitan planning organizations in it, much more than the other 49 states, possibly one of the 49 states combined. So the state has taken a big interest in MPOs here in Florida. Some of the things we would think about doing to make regionalism more active, more addressing these issues I'll present in a minute, would not really have much of an impact by state law. Coordination and things like that. Some of the things you heard from Mr. Blanton earlier, for example. Shared staffing, but still separate governing boards. Maybe, depending on the way it was done, you get the yellow dots for that. And then the pink red dots, you get sort of a full-blown merger. And there are issues in the state language statutes that would probably impact that kind of action. We're not at that point yet of making recommendations, but we're already beginning to think about the implications. So And what did we identify as the peer issues? These things, some of them have come out over and over again. They should not, some of them should not be a big surprise, I don't think. How to address regional revenue funding and generation for big regional projects. The other big one I think I've heard probably the most often, perhaps, is local versus regional decision-making and the tensions you have trying to get regional projects through a number of local entities. Not a surprise there either. Implementation, communication, land development. Just pick one out of the list here, just as random to let you know where we're thinking. We know that people trying to get to meetings have a difficult time when it's farther away. And so if you start thinking about merging boards, merging these large geographic areas, it's just a practical matter. It can be difficult to get people to move for an hour and a half to get to a meeting. So a lot of things actually are very subtle and nuanced in here. There are a lot of things that MPOs do that maybe don't make the headlines, but they certainly have a relationship to different degrees in land use planning, development, and things like that. So all these things are sort of what we're thinking about as key peer issues. I will maybe come back to this slide if you have questions about those issues. Those are the things we're going to be doing to help frame out the kinds of MPOs that we'll be doing for peer studies. That's the next phase of work, as I said. Once we know that, we'll present that back to the steering body, which is the study management team, we're calling it. They will provide some feedback on those things, and we'll begin making the phone calls. And we're beginning information from other regions from around the country to bring that back to you at a future meeting and let you see that. The big item on the agenda, the one that will get some of the external attention, is going to be, and it's still tentative, but it's a pretty good date, May 18th. Will be the second big workshop, almost a year to the day after the first one that was held that generated our project. And we'll be presenting the results of these peer studies and some initial thoughts about pathways to making improvements, everything from full consolidation perhaps to some middle ground, and let people weigh in on what they see the pros and the cons are. That was as quick as I can make. A lot of data, as you saw, happen here today, but I'm happy to take questions, as are the staff of TBARTA and Mr. Kramer, wherever he went, he's back there, hiding back there, to talk about policy things. So if you have any questions, we'll try to field them.
Thank you, Scott. Any questions? Betty?
I just have one, and it was your first statement saying about how we have so much more language in Florida addressing MPOs than anywhere else in the country and even combined. So what's the take on that? That others are not so possessed with the whole MPO? I mean, it's interesting to me. I'm just trying to get what the takeaway is from that comment.
Yeah, no, and Jeff can feel free to jump in here. He's done a lot of research as well, more than I have actually, but maybe a combined is a bit of an exaggeration. But you do have a lot of language. For example, the state statute limits the number of board members, policy board members that you can have to 25. I don't see that in other places that I do work in. So some of these things, these actions we might consider would certainly, run into state statutes. Would either have to be changed or we'd have to change our recommendation to make it work.
Well, and I bring that up because I do believe that the legislature in enacting the legislation's goal was to try to move beyond bureaucracy, rhetoric, constant planning to projects. And if we're stuck because of the language that we have in our statutes with dealing with constant planning, constant talk, rhetoric, if there's a way to get out of this and move forward, I would like to hear that. Yeah. So we can focus on that.
Yeah, I mean, so we're still trying to identify what the issues and the barriers really are. And if that's one of them, that is a great point. We need to really kind of focus on that as we begin to move this next phase. How have other places overcome some of those things and moved past them and been successful? Or maybe not. What's been the key to success or failure with them?
I would only add Jeff Kramer with the Center for Urban Transportation Research at USF. And MPOs are sort of odd ducks, if you will. They're created and required in federal law, federal rule, and we have a lot of state statute that also governs the operations and the activities undertaken by MPOs. And you don't find that in a lot of other states. They're all governed by the federal rules. But if you look, for example, at New York State, as an example, never once in their statutes do they ever mention MPOs. So they are strictly constructs of federal law. Now, they have relationships with counties and cities and the DOT in New York because they exist as federal requirements. And a lot of the counties are providing staffing services, as you have here. But we have this other layer of MPO guidance regulation in the state that exceeds any other states. Some of it is intended, as you say, to hasten the decision-making process. Some might prevent some of the things that you might want to be considering, or at least you'd have to either operate under them or amend the statute. Scott gave the example of the cap on board membership. I don't believe that it exists in any other state. The Florida's MPO Advisory Council a few years ago had gone out seeking, it used to be 19. They wanted it removed. Some of the MPOs in the state wanted to be able to enlarge to whatever they felt was necessary to meet their local conditions. And the legislature said, now we think that'll create chaos, we'll go up to 25. So there is a dichotomy here between what the local MPOs would want and what the state legislature thinks is appropriate.
Questions?
Yes, thank you. I know one of the catalysts, and this was before I was involved at the Hillsborough County Commission or whatever, one of the catalysts for this was to federal, under Secretary of Transportation Anthony Foxx, to start combining these metropolitan areas. And I think there's, in the MPOs, but I think there's still, I hear it referred to frequently at meetings because the retraction of that rule, which I know Ms. Calvert referred to in her remarks this morning, but that was done actually one of the first bipartisan efforts that actually we don't hear about because it was so quiet, overwhelmingly passed through Congress and signed by President Trump to reverse that policy. I just wondered if you could talk about that for a few minutes so that the public are aware, and that actually occurred and kind of the basis underlying some of this.
Right. I mean, that was actually, I think, one of the very first actions that the incoming president took was that particular law. And for a lot of people, I'm sure they probably thought, well, why this one? Because it seems like a pretty obscure item. But it did receive a lot of pushback. And that was, as I recall, the notice of proposed rulemaking, when that came out, there was a lot of pushback from all quarters. I mean, some favoritism, obviously, but from MPO, traditionalists and staff, all the way over to other people. And I think it's a matter of just forcing it. I think it's the issue of, forcing you to take this action, carte blanche, whether you wanted to do it or not. And that was probably a lot of the issue there. But it's legitimate. There's a lot of issues we begin to think about, as we see on the screen, trying to make this happen and make it work effectively. I've been around. I've seen a lot of systems and a lot of MPOs, and they make their system work. It's not that we are going to recommend something that's going to totally fall flat, but there are things that work better than others under certain conditions. The state statutes are one condition. There are others too. Yeah, I was a little surprised that was the very first thing. I think it was a hot topic a little bit at that time when it first came in, but it's legitimate. There's a lot of concerns about trying to make this local tension and regional decision-making work together. I don't know if that's really an answer or more of a commentary, but.
I just kind of wanted your comments on it. And I also understood that the way the original rule, I don't know if this is accurate or not, the way the original rule played out is it combined everything from Boston to DC and to Richmond in one single MPO. Is that basically accurate?
I don't know that it actually went as far as actually delineating that, but yeah, the potential is certainly there, right?
Yeah. Just to add, the rule as it was written would have required many, well more than the half, probably close to 2/3 of the MPOs in the country to reconsider their boundaries and their organizational structures as a result. We may like to think that we're unique, and we are in many ways. One urbanized area and 3 MPOs in the core area. But the situation would have been much more significant in the Northeast Corridor and also around Chicago and in that area, which is where a lot of the push for the legislative overturn of the federal rule came from, not just Florida, but all across the country.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay, thanks so much for that report.
Thank you.
We'll next recognize we'll recognize Scott Pringle from Jacobs to update us on the RTFP.
Good morning, or I should say probably afternoon. Before I get into the presentation, Scott Pringle with Jacobs. I'm the consultant project manager for the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan. And I do want to thank our leadership from the Tampa Bay Area Transportation Management Advisory Group. We did have the opportunity to discuss the draft recommendations coming from our effort here on the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan last Friday. We had about 4 hours to discuss that. I will attempt to make that significantly shorter here this morning. But again, I do want to recognize the TMA's input and leadership, and we greatly appreciate all that direction as we move this draft concept to the next phase, which is giving the community an opportunity to vet that concept and have a prolonged dialogue regarding the recommendations in that concept. So, the majority of the last year, we've been focusing on updating and really taking this data-driven approach to identify not only what the vision for premium transit is in the Tampa Bay area, but also how do we start building towards that vision? What is that catalyst project? Where is that place where we can start moving this vision forward? And that was really our team's mission as we identified here in step one, which is what is that project or what is those projects to move this vision forward? Now, at the TMA meeting, we did have a unanimous consensus from all the TMA members around this draft concept to take it out to the public. And admittedly, you know, some of the conversations then moved on to what's essentially shown here is, you know, questions 2 and 3, which is, again, how do you actually fund this project? Who takes ownership of this project? And I really believe that'll be a big part of the conversation as we move forward in the next year. So the plan's purpose, answering number 1, was to define and validate that regional vision, and how do we get started? How do we move towards implementing that vision? And that first step is really should be something that's going to compete well for federal and state grant dollars. Now, the plan itself was never designed to be another study to sit on the shelf. This was in its mission, from its core, the opportunity to develop an implementation plan, not another study. But this plan is not designed to replace any of the long-range transportation efforts that are going on either at the MPO level, at the TBARTA level, but complement those efforts moving forward. And I will mention this sort of term several times, that catalyst project, or that first step towards building that vision. And that catalyst, and I want to be clear because there's been a lot of comments both in the media over the past couple of weeks. This catalyst project does not replace any of the other transit needs that we've identified in that long-term vision. Again, this is a good place to start down that path of building towards that ultimate vision. And again, it is not designed to replace any other future transit needs. So our first step was to define and identify that regional vision. I had the opportunity to present this vision to this board a couple of months back. You can see it here on your screen as well. And again, that vision includes all the blue lines that are being presented on that map, which does touch a majority of the Tampa Bay region. After we identified that vision, our next step was to start looking at what we felt was the most competitive corridors out of that vision and start looking at the modes. So what type of transit, premium transit service can actually operate on these corridors? Is it something that actually works as a ferry or a waterborne service? We looked at a number of different steel wheel technologies, light rail, commuter rail, and a number of rubber tire technologies as well, which includes bus rapid transit as part of that. Now, a big element of where we see the transportation industry moving towards, and as part of that, the transit industry, is this move towards autonomous technology, those driverless vehicles. So we've definitely had a very deep look at what are some of the needs that would come forth as it relates to driverless vehicles. For example, looking at the infrastructure, power infrastructure that would be needed to be put in place along a corridor, or the communication infrastructure along a particular corridor that would allow this region to take advantage of those autonomous technologies as they come on and are available to deploy. So after those two steps, we started to narrow down to essentially 5 different alternatives as we walked into step 3, this step that we've been focused on over the past couple of months. Those 5 alternatives are shown here. It's rubber tire service on the I-275 corridor, urban rail, essentially something like a light rail system along 275. We also looked at 3 different alternatives on the CSX corridor, which is, again, rubber tire, urban rail, and commuter rail. Now, the distinction between urban and commuter rail is that an urban rail service has stations that are closer together with more frequent service throughout the day, whereas a commuter-style service would have less frequent service during the peak throughout the day and stations that are placed further apart. We have a lot of the information from this Step 3 technical evaluation. It's been posted to our website, and we'll continue to post more information to our website as we go through the next couple of weeks. And we had a 4-hour conversation last Friday about all the elements of the draft plan. So please go to the website. You can see that meeting that's posted online as well. The criteria we used to evaluate those 5 alternatives here is we looked at a number of different things, from land use to mobility, ridership, the benefits of the particular project, and ultimately how cost effective those alternatives were. So I'm going to touch on a few highlights of that data as we presented to the TMA last Friday. I get questioned about this all the time. You know, what are we looking at, Scott, in regards to total travel time from Wesley Chapel to St. Pete if we're looking at the I-275 corridor? And when we're looking at a median running service that's operating wholly within the interstate, both rubber tire and urban rail are essentially making that connection in about an 80-minute time period, whereas you can see the times here for rubber tire, urban rail, and commuter rail on the CSX corridor ranging from approximately 15 to 20 minutes in length. I will note, when we look at rubber tire service on the I-275 corridor, what we're assuming is something that stops at every station, starting at Wesley Chapel and going all the way to downtown St. Pete. There's definitely a lot of opportunity when you're looking at rubber tire service to actually have services that skip stations and get people quickly between points A and B. For example, we can easily pick up somebody in Wesley Chapel, make a stop at the potential intermodal center in the university area, and then go straight downtown. So there's a lot of flexibility when you're looking at rubber tire to actually make those travel speeds a little bit faster and more competitive. On the ridership side, we looked at a number of different elements that go into the ridership calculation. We use the federal model, which is a recommendation to predict transit ridership in the country, and based on that model in 2017, so these are not ridership figures for 2020 or 2025, this is how the service would anticipate to be behaving today. And you can see the numbers here on the I-275 corridor. We're looking at between 3.6 for the rubber tire to 5.6 million riders per day. I will draw your attention to the darker bar contained within that graph. Those are the new riders on the I-275 corridor, where you're looking at approximately 1.3 to 2.6 new riders to that service, and these would be riders who would probably otherwise drive and are new to using transit service, and that has a big impact as we go through a lot of other evaluation criteria, specifically when we're talking about the benefits of the project as it relates to emissions, energy use, and crashes and safety. When you are able to attract new riders to a service, you're definitely going to be able to reduce emissions and energy use as part of the project. Now, at the same time, we looked at the CSX corridor. Again, rubber tire, urban rail, commuter rail. You can see the numbers here ranging from 1.9 to 3.3 million annual riders per day or per year. So we completed our Step 3 evaluation. a big part of that was identifying exactly how much each one of these projects costs. And we looked at the project cost as, again, as it were today, if it were to be constructed today. And what you can see here is that we're finding that to operate in the median of the interstate, that we had projects on the rubber tire side ranging from $2.3 to $2.9 billion, $3.9 billion to $1.5 billion in an urban rail system on the interstate. These are extremely high project costs within the interstate corridor. Now, we also looked at, again, the CSX corridor, where urban rail was upwards between $800 million to $1 billion in total project costs. But keep in mind, the I-275 corridor is 41 miles long. The CSX corridor is 9 miles long. But within the metrics for being competitive for federal dollars is what they call the FTA calls cost effectiveness. And they would like to see your project basically move people annually for $10 or less per trip. So basically it's a metric of looking at how many people you're actually anticipating to move on that service and how much does it cost to move them. And if you look at these 5 alternatives, none of those achieve that $10 per trip or better. So it was at this point that we recognized immediately that we had an issue, that none of these alternatives, because of those costs, were actually going to be competitive for those federal and state grant dollars. So it's at that point where we took the next step and started looking at these corridors in a lot more detail and doing what we call value engineering on these corridors to really understand specifically how can we tackle the issues of cost, what are some of the elements that are really creating the higher costs of the infrastructure along the project, and how can we make those projects more competitive in the federal process. Listed here quickly are just some of those elements that would make a transit project, for example, in the interstate, more expensive. If you're running in the median, you're looking at widening overpasses, adding structure for bridges, and a number of other infrastructure improvements. You're also on the CSX corridor looking at the use or purchase of the right-of-way from CSX, as well as the cost to both refurbish the tracks that are out there today and double track them, specifically in the case of doing sort of urban rail. So we looked at that $10 per trip metric. And what we did is we said, let's take this opportunity to sort of rethink how we're going to move these projects forward. And what we did is we set that $10 trip as that $10 cost per trip as our goal. So we said we want our projects to be competitive. We want to reach that $10 per trip goal. How do we get there? Well, we know what our annual ridership is, and we know what the operations will cost annually. So the big question mark was the capital. So really what it comes down to is what, as a region, does the travel market support? What does our ridership support? What is that budget that we can afford on the capital side and still be competitive for those federal dollars? And with those budgets in mind, we started tackling those 5 alternatives and really trying to find an opportunity to get those projects more competitive. And the one way we can do that, very simply put, is looking at the assets that we have in play today. For example, on the I-275 corridor, the existing asset is the interstate. It is the roadway. How can we better leverage the roadway to the advantage of transit and making that transit project competitive? Now, on the CSX corridor, same approach, and what we found there, same conclusion. How do we maximize the existing asset within that corridor, which in this case is the freight rail corridor? How can we use that existing freight rail corridor to reduce some of those overall project costs? So going through this value engineering process, the result of this was the development of 2 concepts. And the first concept I'm going to walk you through is on the I-275 corridor, which is a rubber tire concept. And what this actually does is it's a combination of using the shoulders along the interstate, widening those shoulders, hardening those shoulders so the transit vehicle can operate on those shoulders outside of congestion, outside of regular traffic, as well as using some of the other plans that the Department of Transportation is looking at in modernizing the interstate, specifically the Howard Franklin Bridge, as was mentioned earlier, and on throughout the corridor. So I'm going to actually walk you through each one of those segments in that longer 41-mile corridor. So starting in St. Petersburg, moving our way north, we do have the opportunity to coordinate with what PSTA is looking at in regards to premium transit service in downtown St. Petersburg, potentially using the same space. Again, using the assets that are out there today to our advantage to reduce those project costs, at which point we can head north on the interstate, use those shoulder running concepts to make the connection between downtown St. Petersburg and the greater Gateway area. Now, when we get to the greater Gateway area and we have to cross this, the Tampa Bay itself, there's a large water crossing over 7 miles. We ran into the situation where we have significantly high capital costs associated with a new bridge that would be specifically designed for transit. So there was an opportunity to look at what the department was already doing and what their plans are for the replacement of the Howard Franklin Bridge. And we could actually take that rubber tire transit vehicle and move it out of the shoulders and take advantage of the express lanes across the Howard Franklin Bridge, significantly reducing the project cost, but basically only requiring the transit project to essentially pay for what it took to operate the vehicle and to purchase the vehicle to drive that vehicle across the bay. Now, when we get into the West Shore area, we do have an opportunity to connect directly to the Tampa International Airport, again, leveraging some of the modernization plans the department has been considering. And between West Shore and downtown Tampa, we do have an opportunity to run, again, either adjacent to the express lanes traffic in the median and a dedicated lane between West Shore and downtown Tampa with a number of community connections along the way. Now, when we get into downtown Tampa, where our plans are to actually get out of the interstate, make a connection to an intermodal center or the existing Marion Street transit facility, and it's at that point we need to get through and get further north on the interstate, which meant we had to, again, tackle a major sort of infrastructure issue, which is the downtown interchange. And the way we solve that is essentially looking at the potential to use Tampa, Florida, and dedicated lane for transit for rubber tire vehicles on Tampa, Florida, which will allow our service to get through the downtown interchange or essentially underneath the downtown interchange, and then take advantage of an opportunity to use Flora, Nebraska to get back onto the interstate and again run shoulder running from downtown Tampa to the USF area and actually just beyond the USF area, and at which point we could then either work back into general purpose lanes to make the connection further north to Wesley Chapel and State Route 54. And again, where we're finding congestion, we want to make sure that we're looking at opportunities to build the infrastructure to bypass that congestion, to maintain that convenience to the rider. And there's a lot of congestion around the 54, especially the 56 interchange. So being part of those future plans for 56 and potentially looking at, is there an opportunity again to do something like shoulder running to bypass some of that congestion in the Wesley Chapel area. So by doing this, by developing this shoulder running concept, we're able to dramatically cut the overall project cost. You can see here from 2.3 to 1.3 billion. And then we do have this unique opportunity to actually leverage some of those roadway plans that the department is looking at. And if we can combine the transit project with those roadway plans, we do have the opportunity to have even more cost savings. And by that, a perfect example is, where there may be an instance where a noise wall needs to be built, that could potentially be built using roadway dollars and really taking that cost off of the transit vehicles cost, again, helping us be efficient with those overall transit dollars. And by doing that, reducing it down to the $455 million approximately, we're actually now putting ourselves in a position on this corridor to be cost effective, to be competitive for those federal and state grant dollars. This is the capital cost breakdown. It's a very traditional model when you're looking for federal funds where you would expect or hopefully look to receive $50 of your overall or 50% of your overall project received from the Capital Investment Grant Program by FTA, and then the split of a match at the state level of 25% to the local portion, which is also 25%. What we did is we took the $455 million price tag for the rubber tire project, and we broke it down by each one of those percentages. And important to note, the local capital commitment, but also that the operations for the service, which is $7 million per year, which again would be fundamentally something that we would have to look at and maintain here in Tampa Bay. Now, we took the exact same approach with the CSX corridor, as I mentioned, and we do have an opportunity to leverage those existing freight assets. And the way we can do that is use an electric or a diesel multiple unit vehicle. It's a rail vehicle that can operate on an active freight corridor, and it's been approved by the Federal Rail Administration for safety purposes. And by doing that, by not double tracking the entire corridor, doing sidings, using this vehicle, we're able to reduce that $800 million to the $1 billion total project cost down to the $490 to the $620 million that we're showing here. And again, same conversation where you have the 50-25-25 split, but I will call your attention to the operating. To operate an electric or a diesel multiple unit on an annual basis would be more expensive than the rubber tire service. We're talking about 9 miles at $12 million per year, or 41 miles at $7 million per year for the rubber tire vehicle. And so when we put these two projects side by side, and again, I come back to my opening statement that we're identifying the vision, but how do we get started? So there's a lot of merit to the conversations around the CSX corridor as we identified in this process, and I think it's reflected in the number of conversations around the CSX corridor that has occurred over the last decade, if not more. So both of those projects, with the things that I mentioned, are competitive for federal funds, but the reasonings that we put forth as the move, what we feel is the catalyst project, that first step in the plan, which is shoulder running on the I-275 corridor, is that we hit our mark on the cost effectiveness at below $10 per cost per trip. We don't really need to look for right away if we have this opportunity to partner with the Department of Transportation, except for the station areas. We'll have to look at right away there. And the time to construct, if we're partnering and leveraging that partnership opportunity with the department, is significantly less than what we're looking at on the CSX corridor, being that, again, it comes down to that right-of-way conversation. We would have to go and enter into a conversation with CSX to either get the use or purchase of that portion of the rail corridor. Again, a reminder of those capital costs. The annual operations at $7 and $12 million, the length of the corridor between the two, the 41 million to 9 miles, and the jobs and population served by each one of those corridors. So coming out of this project, it is our recommendation to move forward with that I-275 rubber tire transit vehicle on the interstate, because we do really strongly believe both of the data showing us that this is a great place to get started on our overall long-term vision and aspirations for premium transit in the Tampa Bay area. And let's keep in mind what we're actually talking about here. We're not talking about your everyday bus. We're not talking about the type of bus service that is predominantly out in the communities as it stands today. We're talking about a bus service that has its own dedicated lane. It has these gold standard aspirations of service, which means getting people quickly from point A to point B. And these vehicles, honestly, they look like a train. They're as fast as a train. They have the amenities and comforts of a train vehicle. You'll have actual station facilities where you can buy your ticket as well as other amenities for the passenger itself. Again, using those dedicated lanes to bypass congestion in our most congested areas of the interstate for much less cost. And by reducing the cost on the running way itself, it allows us this opportunity to invest in stations. We're talking significant investment in stations along the entire corridor. We're not talking about a bench and a shelter and a pole. We're talking about significant investments in these facilities that really does have the opportunity to sort of encourage economic development around the station areas and potentially be an opportunity for public-private partnership at these station areas. And as I mentioned before, we're also able to invest in what we think will be the future of transit, which is moving towards these autonomous solutions by putting in today those communications and power structure needs and making that part of the cost so that we can adapt to the technology as it becomes available. So again, we're going to have this opportunity to connect to a lot of other needs and services within the regional plan. Everything from connecting to the plans in St. Petersburg to downtown Tampa and the extension of the streetcar, all the way to the 5456 vision in Pasco County. And again, I'll reiterate again that, what we're looking for is a way to get started. What is this catalyst project to really get us moving towards construction of eventually that entire vision for premium transit in the Tampa Bay area. After this morning's meeting, we're going to move towards that public vetting process, which will carry on all the way through spring and summer of this year as we finalize the plan. You can see a couple of the activities. We're going to have a number of different outreach activities, including street teams that go out to farmers markets, as well as regional transit forums. And everything will be on our website, which is tbregionaltransit.com. And I apologize for the speed of going through that much information, but I will take any questions at this time.
That was impressive.
Thank you, Scott, for an amazing summary there. I was at the TMA meeting, and you have been able to concise it a little more, but with all the guts of it there, you refine this to an art form. We need to send you on the road nationwide. I would like to emphasize that we are not here today to endorse this specific plan. We are to encourage it to move to the next stage, which is public vetting and the process that Scott has outlined here. I'm sure there are a few questions from board members on specifics, so we'll entertain those now, and then we have a resolution to encourage you to move this forward, and then to address an issue which we had discussed at a prior.
Are we losing quorum?
Do we need to vote?
We're going to have a resolution, so.
Do we still have quorum with Cliff gone?
Yes, we have 7.
Can we do that like soon? I have a
Okay.
meeting.
Oh, okay, yeah, we can.
7, 8. You've got 8, so you're one of.
We can do that. Why don't we, before questions, if we can do that, why don't you read the resolution, Ray? And then this is basically to advance this for public comment. It is not taking a position on the.
Okay, this is the wording on it. As the agency tasked with implementing regional transit in the Tampa Bay region, TBARTA supports sending the Catalyst project identified in the draft regional transit feasibility plan out to the public for input. TBARTA supports using improvements identified in the Tampa Bay Next plan for modernizing the interstate system as an important component in saving considerable costs to provide the opportunity for the creation of a regional transit system in the Tampa Bay region.
Move approval of the resolution.
There's been a motion, approval, any discussion?
Yes. I have, first of
Chair
all.
recognizes Pat.
Thank you very much. I have some questions. I don't know if everyone here, there's been lots of public comment, I've gotten lots of feedback already, but today in the Times, their editorial, region needs real transit, not marketing. I think it's important that we start looking at this. When the presentation was first made at the TMA, I thought it was the start of a discussion. I didn't realize that a single of those 2 cited projects would be, what would be moved forward at that time. One of the concerns I have here today, because operating costs have always been my concern. We still have not figured out anything about how to pay for this. There's no taxing authority here. These will come from, if anything, the different counties. And, I, as a member of the Board of County Commissioners of Hillsborough County, of the MPO of Hart, will be one of the people that will be tasked with moving this forward and either looking for county dollars to support it or however to fund it. I haven't heard anything about anybody coming forward to fund it any other way. And so one of the things that the Times says today, I had thought the other day when I saw this that the operating costs for the this BRT, this form of BRT, was 5 to 7 million. Today I see 7 million, but the Times says that that's inaccurate, that there was a error in the math and that it's actually $10.5 million. Can you comment on that, if that's accurate?
No, that's not accurate. No.
Because they say that in their editorial here. To build and operate the system would cost $10.5 million, about a 22% higher than the figure released at the January 19th meeting. Officials blame this discrepancy on a data entry error. That's what it says.
So the reference is actually to the annualized cost of the total project cost as it breaks down by the 50, 25, 25. And I will stand here before you today, admit that I made the mistake. I grabbed the wrong numbers. It was a segment of the full 41 miles, and that was related to the capital costs. And that was how the capital costs were being annualized. We did correct that. We did send it back out to the TMA, and we also did send it out to the media outlets, and that's where they're getting that information from.
I also think it's important, and the Times raises important issues about this, and I feel I need to raise these at this time, and because of the position I'm in, and this is like my third vetting, and I think it's important to express this and what I will be willing to move forward or talk about, or and what I'm hearing back at this time. One of the things I thought that we were doing the other day at the TMA is simply moving it forward for discussion where it was already in discussion because it had already been put on the front pages of the paper and whatever else. As far as this, when we talk about gold standard BRT, I think it's very important publicly to not talk about it being gold standard BRT. It's not gold standard BRT. It is something between express buses and maybe a bronze or lower BRT or something like that. I mean, this is not a congestion-proof type of transit. It is going to be, for a lot of it, in regular lanes. You can have a better vehicle or, you know, a more accommodating vehicle. I think it doesn't lend itself as usually stops that are on expressways do not lend themselves, I would maintain from everything I've seen around the country, to transit-oriented development and 3P investment. And when we're talking about costs here, and we're talking about the public coming forward in any way to support this, I do think we have to look at our premium transit opportunities, CSX being that premium transit opportunity in Hillsborough County, and actually attracting, as you pointed out on here, more new riders than even this 42-mile long option. I never kind of understood the idea of comparing a 9-mile option to a 42-mile option. I didn't, and you know, this came kind of in the last week of this long process. So I think it's important for me to at least say this, because I've been put in public twice on this. I would not support this as a catalyst project. I do think that we should be moving forward with the CSX and looking at that opportunity as a catalyst project. Going forward, I think there has to be a lot more discussion about this, and so I felt the need to make it public. I think that this editorial that was put in the Times today is well taken and makes excellent points about what we should do. Also in terms of federal funding, which we haven't discussed at all, but we said that the point of this was to attract federal dollars. There's new starts and small starts. I'm not sure which this project would fit under, but I know the bigger project would not fit under small starts, which is the more likely source of federal funds. And the smaller projects are less competitive and more likely to move forward. We haven't heard those analysis about how that works. And so anyway, I will put this out and say, I really want to see us in Hillsborough County. I think we have to be looking at our transit-oriented development opportunities as it moves through neighborhoods. I think the CSX corridor and the CSX tracks are our golden opportunity, not to build new expensive rail, but to utilize what we have there for transit-oriented development to transform our communities. And I think it's the only way that we can possibly, in Hillsborough County, which is the most dense transit corridor in the entire region, that is the only way that we can move the number of people through that area. The only way that the Rays have expressed is to have a stadium in Ybor City. CSX moves into Ybor City, moves across downtown. I don't see this solving in Hillsborough County our transit needs as being a first priority. So I just want to express that to the group.
Thank you. Any other comments? Kathleen?
I would like to say I think it's excellent. I really, what I like about this is that you've taken, first of all, I like the working with FDOT and the working with HARD and PTSA and all of the sort of programs, and we actually have something that is actionable. It's not another plan for a shelf or a shelf for a plan. The second thing I'd like to say is just to Commissioner Kemp's point, it's not like it's only one solution. And with all due respect to my friends at the St. Pete Times, they are not oracles of facts all the time. They have an opinion here, and they've led with this opinion for a very long time. And I think we should be focused, as I said in my briefing, on mobility. You know, people get lost in transit versus rail versus this or that. We are in an innovation time in our lives that things are moving so fast. We're not even we're gonna be riding around like Jetsons, you know, in my lifetime, and I don't think people ever anticipated that. So I think we have to be open to having the dialogue. You know, when I said I would like to speed up the timeline, I don't want to go all the way till September to wait to start something. I think it's great to have all this input. I'd be curious as to how many people were at the TMA, and I would stay on a fast track to have the conversations, to be out in the community and let people know we're not looking at just one option. We need an initial option. And I think we need to get started, because if we don't get started, we're going to lose the entire support of anybody believing anywhere in this community that we can do anything on transportation that's going to move bodies. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. Commissioner Seal.
And I concur with Kathleen. I think this is step one, and it's an extremely good option to get us moving. And as she mentioned, in our lifetime, we are going to see autonomous vehicles. And this actually looks towards that future technology and using dedicated lanes and shoulders, et cetera, that really can make that happen. So I actually, without lane rail, I mean, rail could be obsolete within the next 10 years, truly.
Or 5.
Or 5. So depending on how fast the technology goes. So I'm excited about the concepts and looking forward to having the public's reaction to them. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Yes.
I think Janet was first. Commissioner Long.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and I'll be very brief. I'll be very brief. Well, I have a loud voice, so I think I can make myself heard. I agree with everything that Kathleen and Commissioner Seal said, and I do want to emphasize strongly, we have to start somewhere. We have to start with a pilot. We cannot be parochial on this board and not realize that there is a beginning. For the first time in our region, PSTA has moved further into the federal process for funding for our BRT line, which is the beginning of this spine, that I am excited and encouraged. And it's too bad that the Times did not choose to talk about the positives of what we're trying to do. We have to start somewhere. Thank you.
Betsy.
And you can't ignore the political realities. You know, when you're coming forward with a project, timing's everything. Who's in leadership? Who's going to support that? I don't think the rail would be supported. I think we need to be realistic and say that this is a project that can be supported and can move forward. That's my take on it. And you presented the information that showed that this was the preferred project. So I think that combination, along with political realities, I think we need to do something as TBARTA. Yes.
Thank you. Pat, did you have one final comment?
I'd just like to address a few things. One is, in terms of political realities, it's in terms of getting support for a project. And I think there would be hard pressed to get support for the project as outlined now. I'm a big supporter of, or seeing that AV vehicles, I do believe that that's our future. It's not that I have a problem with. I'm not judging a form of mobility one over the other. And in fact, I think that there's a time in the very near future where the CSX tracks might be removed, and that would be a transitway that we could own for whatever vehicles we want to put on it. It's more for me the corridor, and there's no reason why the corridor from USF down to Ybor, down to downtown, actually even across South Tampa, can't then be connected at the Marion Transit Station where this is going to stop anyway, and where express buses just can't be used for what we're talking about here. And then you have, the one connection from downtown to the airport, from the airport across the gateway, and then I'm not sure exactly what stops you have in Pinellas, but there's no, in other communities where they have transit, they have stops like we're looking at here, and you change trains, or you change in this case, changing modes. So there's nothing that precludes this from being part of the way that plan works. But I, again, will just state that I really think we need to be looking at traditional express bus, which, that could be put up tomorrow, especially if the state was willing to foot the bill for the operations as they have in Miami-Dade at $50 million for operating costs in Miami-Dade for their train at Sunrail in Orlando, where they have put forward the costs for the next 7 years. I think that is what we need to be doing as a region, is looking at how we can bring state dollars. I think that's in a maturing metro area with our region needs and our extraordinarily low support for our local transit, that we need to be looking at state dollars to support this express bus service. And, I'd like to see the CSX corridor become our first priority. And I think that the reality is that would, in Hillsborough County, where we're going to have to ask people to pay for it, that is what will get that support of those dollars.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Motion and a second. Sue, would you please call the roll?
Jim Bolton?
Yes.
Melanie Griffin?
Yes.
Cliff Manuel? Michael Millett?
Yes.
Commissioner Wayne Dukes? Commissioner Pat Kemp?
No.
Commissioner Betsy Benak?
Yes.
Commissioner Catherine Starkey? Commissioner Karen Seal?
Yes.
Mayor Rick Reisman? Mayor Bob Buckhorn? Kathleen Shanahan?
Yes.
Commissioner Janet Long?
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't think we have any. Yeah, let me bring that up. The other issue here, and we had taken prior board action and wanted to be the main recipients of the feasibility study that was just presented today. In furtherance of that, we have a draft memorandum of agreement with the other agencies, with PSTA, HART, FDOT, and the others that we have collaboratively worked on. I would want to direct staff to go ahead and circulate that around with the other parties to the agreement. Mr. Counsel, do we need
You don't need a vote.
Don't need a vote on that, so I would direct staff to do that as expeditiously as possible. And again, this is just about receipt of the plan as the major lead agency as required by Florida statutes.
Okay.
So we have the RTFP. Ray is going to briefly, I know in the interest of time.
Okay, I'm going to go really fast. Oh, I'm sorry, this was you. Okay, the Citizen Advisory Committee, I want to remind you all that you either need to reappoint the person on the CAC representing you, and if you don't have one, to appoint someone. We have a meeting coming up in February, so we need that done. You have something in your packet that has the names of the different people that are on there now. You can reaffirm them, or you can appoint somebody new to that, and it gives you a description of when they were appointed and by who. And then for the governor's members, that I'm not sure if had members on here before also, that's true. So that just needs to take place, if you would get back with us as soon as you can on that. Then just a couple things. We've been working on transportation demand management and research. We've been building new employer partnerships with our van pool program. We're now up to 27 people beginning to participate. We're up to 112 vans now, up from 98 in January of 2017. So we've got new vans going in with Dill. We've been working with Hart. We've taken some of their riders off. 24 LX and 25 LX have joined the van pools now. And our regional school commute program is now in Citrus and Pasco County, in addition to Pinellas and Hillsborough. We're up from 66 to 123 schools participating.
Okay, does that include all of your reports?
Yes.
Okay, is there any other business coming before the board? Karen
I
Seal.
just wanted to mention with the Citizens Advisory Committee, I'm happy to reappoint Travis Norton, but I also would like to make a plea that we add some more diversity, including females to the CAC, since it's would be, I think, a wise idea.
Wise point.
Thank you.
Wise point, thank you. Any others?
Move we adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion. Good meeting, I'm glad we got that. I think that we can, same.
Yeah, I knew, I did know that. I knew it was
Memorandum
very
that
much.
we had a prior note.
No, I'm fine with it. I just wanted them to kind of say, okay, so I can get brought up as long as it's ethics. Because if you didn't, I would be concerned about, you know. Yes, what do you do? Oh, we got to sign stuff.
I got a pen right here, yeah.
Okay, I know what this is.
Yeah, I can, I gotta pick up some at the airport, but call me, we'll get together and coffee or something.
Because last call was every intention to be 5 minutes.